A pack of vicious dogs was barking furiously at a man. At that moment, a boy's desperate scream echoed from the small house opposite. The dogs immediately fell silent. The man's eyes, heavy with emotion, gazed towards the house. What reached his ears was not only the child's screams, but also the low growl of a demon. He pulled his hat down low and continued walking towards the small house. The film officially begins. Young Father Tomas was telling the parishioners a story from the Bible. Through the story, he wanted to tell the believers that each person would experience God's presence in a different way. Father Tomas was a rising star of the church. His preaching had earned him great prestige among the faithful. At that moment, Tomas saw a man in the distance speaking to him. Strangely, he heard no sound coming from the man, but when someone interrupted him, the man vanished. The interrupter was Angela, who praised Father Tomas's preaching skills and gave him a thick envelope as a small contribution from her family to the church's renovation. However, her family had recently been experiencing some trouble. The film's story also revolved around this four-person Rance family. The scene returned to the small house at the beginning of the film. A priest named Bennett had just arrived, looking for the man from the opening scene. From Bennett's words, it was known that the man's name was Marcus, a veteran exorcist in the church. Marcus had been missing for 26 days. If he did not return, the church in Rome would punish him. Bennett advised Marcus not to continue like that. The people above were very afraid Marcus would mention the Haiti incident, where they had strangled a little girl with bedsheets and hung her body from a mango tree. Marcus seemed to disregard the people in the Roman church. He did not want to return. At that moment, Bennett entered the room and saw a shocking scene. Marcus! Immediately afterward, Bennett went out to confront Marcus, asking why the child inside had not been taken to the hospital in time when it was dying. Marcus angrily scolded Bennett for being pretentious, questioning whether the hospital could even save the child's condition. Bennett understood in his heart. Marcus confidently asserted that he could save the child inside, then drew his gun and chased Bennett away. Before leaving, Bennett threatened that Rome would not spare Marcus. The Roman Catholic Church discovered Marcus's whereabouts, forcing him to perform the exorcism on the boy sooner than planned. The child was barely alive, his hands and feet bound. Marcus wanted to encourage the child to be a little stronger, so he sang a nursery rhyme to him, hoping to alleviate some of the pain. At that moment, the child on the bed began to convulse repeatedly.
God has not abandoned you.
Marcus! Marcus!
While Marcus was performing the ritual on the child, the boy suddenly uttered a voice that wasn't his own. The boy repeatedly called Marcus's name along with foul curses. Even stranger, the child's eyes had turned into two pupils. At that moment, a person appeared behind Marcus. That person was Father Tomas. Tomas didn't understand why he was there either. The child gnashed his teeth ferociously, even biting off his own teeth. Marcus realized the demon had appeared, and he immediately took out the Bible and recited the exorcism. However, this demon seemed very powerful, leaving Marcus somewhat helpless. Tomas, standing bewildered behind them, suddenly realized they couldn't see him at all, but he could actually hold the tooth the child had spat out in his hand. At that moment, Tomas suddenly woke up from his dream. He was still in his own house. Could everything that had just happened have been just a dream? The scene shifts to Angela's home. She suddenly heard strange noises coming from inside the house, as if they were emanating from within the walls. Just then, her youngest daughter, Casey, interrupted her thoughts. Kat had not left her room for days. Her room was extremely dark, and a peculiar cloud of dust hovered above the curtains. Casey pushed open the door and turned on the light. Kat's face was incredibly haggard. She seemed terrified of something, refusing to eat, drink, or socialize. The series of strange occurrences in the house made Angela extremely uneasy. She went to church to find Tomas and told him about the series of bizarre events happening in her family. Since her eldest daughter had returned home injured, strange things had been happening constantly. Kat had been in a car accident at school, an accident that had killed several of her classmates. Moreover, the way she spoke and the way she looked at Angela seemed like she had become a different person. Tomas suggested that perhaps the girl was suffering from something like depression. Angela dismissed that idea. She knew what depression was like. She felt there was something unclean in the house and wanted Tomas to come over to talk to her eldest daughter. Just then, a black crow swooped down, shattering the office window, its blood staining Tomas's Bible. This caused Tomas, who did not believe in ghosts or spirits to waver slightly. He had always believed that the church had simply been a place for spiritual solace for believers. A nightmare about an exorcism ritual and a strange encounter had made him want to uncover the mystery. Tomas hesitantly went to Angela's house. Kat told him that nothing was wrong with her, that everything in the house was just her mother's imagination. Because of Henry, her father, Angela was constantly paranoid. That evening, Angela's family invited Tomas to stay for dinner. The meal was incredibly awkward. Henry's reaction seemed rather slow. Kat was extremely displeased with her father's behavior. And so, dinner ended in an argument. As Tomas prepared to leave, Henry, sitting on the sofa, suddenly changed expression and blurted out an address and the name of another priest.
I am taking off. Father Marcus?
Tomas was being chased by a pack of vicious dogs. He tumbled and ran into a small house. What puzzled him was that he arrived at the scene where Marcus was performing an exorcism. The demon-possessed boy was relentlessly taunting Marcus, and the surrounding environment was also affected by the demon. Marcus angrily asked the boy its name, and when it would leave, the boy's body convulsed, then suddenly became still, and it smiled eerily in response. Just when Marcus thought it was all over, the boy suddenly broke free from his restraints, and with just a few moves, knocked Marcus down. Immediately afterward, the demon controlled the child's head, making it spin 360 degrees. The demon left, but the child was dead. Marcus hugged the child and wept in agony, and all of this was witnessed by Tomas. The next morning, Tomas knew this wasn't just a dream, so he followed the address Henry had given him to find the priest named Marcus. The address was a nursing home. Upon arrival, an old man called Tomas over. The old man knew his name was Tomas, and even knew the names of all the priests in the area. He asked Tomas what he was doing there, and Tomas replied that he was seeking answers. After Tomas left, the old man took off his glasses, and strangely, two pupils appeared in his eyes, cut like in the sample film. Meanwhile, Tomas found Marcus in the nursing home. Their first meeting was one of them. Tomas asked Marcus about the demon, but Marcus did not want to talk much, so Tomas recounted his dream to Marcus. Marcus found it unbelievable. The exorcism had happened 18 months earlier in Mexico City. Now Tomas had come to him based on a dream, which meant he was being manipulated by a force he did not understand. After saying this, Marcus dismissed Tomas. Tomas questioned him, asking if veterans got cowardly with age. After Tomas left, Marcus could not help but cry. He questioned the spot on the wall where the cross had once hung.
This is your damn sign!
The scene shifts back to the room with the strange dust particles. Kat sat in the darkness, lost in thought. At this moment, Tomas arrived at their house and told Angela that he felt a calling from God, which had wanted him to take good care of this family. Just then, a noise suddenly echoed from upstairs. As the two approached Kat's room, a ladder suddenly fell from the attic. Tomas called out, but there was no answer, so he clung to the ladder and climbed up to the attic. But as soon as he switched on the light, the bulb suddenly went out. Tomas used his phone's flashlight to investigate. There seemed to have been someone clinging to the window. He called Kat's name, but received no response. As he was about to move forward, he tripped over something, and in the blink of an eye, the figure vanished. Suddenly, a strange sound came from behind him. Tomas turned around and saw a large rat, but strangely, the rat seemed to have been controlled by something. It frantically writhed its dead body before being crushed by a mysterious force. Suddenly, a hand reached out, grabbed the rat, and pulled it inside. Tomas followed and saw a little girl rush out. It had turned out to be Angela's younger daughter, Casey. Then, Casey lunged towards Tomas in a bizarre posture. Then Casey's face contorted under the light. Just then, Angela suddenly switched on the lights, and everything returned to normal. Casey emerged looking completely unaffected. Angela asked her daughter what she was doing upstairs. Casey, with an innocent and harmless expression, said that Father Tomas had gone up there to kill a rat. Then she said something to Tomas with a hidden meaning.
A book. Don't they say where there's one, there's probably a whole bunch?
Tomas left with a chill running down his spine. Turning around, Casey was standing by the window, smiling eerily at him. At the same time, Marcus, in the nursing home, was packing up his belongings and leaving. It seemed a great battle between man and demon was about to erupt. A young boy carried an oil lamp down the dimly lit corridor. Suddenly, a ferocious face emerged from the shadows, a man yelling at the boy.
Resist the devil, and he will run away from you.
It seemed this man was possessed by a demon. The boy remained calm, opening his Bible to read exorcism instructions. These memories were deeply etched in Marcus's mind. He had been trained by the church since he was very young. In his notebook, he recorded countless exorcism experiences from the past few decades. He was now in Chicago. Meanwhile, something strange was happening at Angela's house. In the dark dining room, a figure sat. From behind, Angela recognized it as her youngest daughter, Casey. But then a man's voice came from the little girl's mouth. Angela, both horrified and terrified, picked up her tablet and recorded her daughter's actions. Casey's hands were writhing all over her body, her mouth uttering words of praise about how soft and smooth she was. Angela softly called Casey's name, but the man's voice in Casey's mouth said, "Your lying mother is watching you. Wake up, baby." Then Casey suddenly returned to normal, staring at her mother in terror.
Casey? Mom?
Angela sent the video to Father Tomas. Tomas recounted to the bishop what he had seen at Angela's house. Casey was definitely possessed by a demon. Only her mother could help. The others in the house all had some kind of problem. He then showed the video Angela sent to the bishop, hoping to obtain church permission to perform an exorcism on Casey. But the bishop evaded the question. A cardinal from Rome would be visiting Chicago in a few days. This was the diocese's top priority. He even asked Tomas if he had been to the nursing home where a priest named Marcus had disappeared, and if Tomas hadn't met him. From this, it was clear that the church leadership did not want Tomas involved in the investigation. Coincidentally, Angela received a commission from Maria to receive the cardinal's advance team. Angela expressed her honor in receiving the Pope, but everything seemed to be connected in some way. At that moment, Angela received a text message from Casey. Angela immediately called Casey, but all she heard on the other end was heavy, labored breathing. Angela rushed home, but no one was home. She called again and heard the phone ringing in Casey's room. Just as she was about to pick up the phone, she heard Casey and others downstairs. It turned out that her father had taken the two daughters out. She asked Casey why she had texted her. Casey said she had left her phone at home and died. Couldn't possibly have texted her mother. At this point, everyone's eyes were fixed on the phone. Unexpectedly, a large centipede was hiding under it, startling Angela. Then, there was a noise under the pillow. Angela looked at Casey in horror. But why had Angela known from the beginning that there was something unclean in the house? Who could explain this to me? What kind of sport is this? Why are they all running around with sticks? Why are their helmets covering their eyes? But every sport has its bad players. These guys are really dirty. Casey was careless and was thrown to the ground by her opponent. Kat watched the scene unfolding on the field with a pained expression. She noticed an empty seat next to her. When Casey turned to look, she saw an old man sitting beside Kat. The old man smiled and waved at Casey. Casey smiled back. The match resumed. The other person still targeting Casey, and once again threw her to the ground. This time, the old man in the stand stood up, and Casey stood up too. She stared intently at the person who had thrown her, her eyes filled with murderous intent. Under Casey's gaze, the person suddenly broke their own leg. Back home, Casey acted as if nothing had happened, playing with building blocks with her older sister. Angela wanted to join their game as well. At this point, Kat told Casey that her mother had asked Father Thomas to inquire about her. She warned Casey to be careful, as her mother would also have Thomas keep an eye on her. Casey then pulled a piece of wood from the bottom of the stacking tower. She peered through the gap, staring intently at her mother. When the tower toppled over, Angela panicked slightly. Casey looked at her with a sinister smile. Angela understood that her daughter was no longer her daughter. The next day, Father Thomas held a homestay program at the church, which was actually to help the homeless. Angela went to see Tomas. Casey's condition had worsened. She could not only move objects but also use her mind. Tomas told her that the church had given him a more important task. He wanted to help Casey, but he needed the church's permission. After Tomas left, Angela took a bottle of water from her bag, drank it all, and prepared to steal holy water. Marcus saw all of this. Instead of scolding her, Marcus refilled the bottle and showed her how to use it. Although holy water doesn't kill demons, it can make them uncomfortable. From this, it's clear Marcus knew something was wrong with her family. At the church, Casey was distributing food to the homeless. At that moment, a homeless person approached. He greeted Casey, then said that he had chosen her specifically because she was so kind, and asked to touch her a little. Marcus noticed the vagrant's unusual behavior and grabbed him. The vagrant then said something to Marcus. This was exactly what the man had said to the boy earlier. It turned out the demon was still there, just in a different body. Moreover, there wasn't just one. Angela poured holy water into Casey's glass. At the dinner table, after taking a sip, Casey glanced at her mother. It must be said that this demon was quite resilient. After drinking the holy water, it still managed to finish its dinner. Then, Casey ran back to her room and vomited into the toilet. The vomit was all green liquid. She felt something in her throat, then pulled out a giant centipede from her mouth. Then Casey went downstairs and sat in the yard. At this moment, the old man who had appeared on the soccer field during the day reappeared. Casey leaned her head on his shoulder, saying that she felt a little unwell. The old man told Casey that she was just a great seed that had broken free from the earth's constraints, seeing the sunlight for the first time. Meanwhile, Henry inside the house was watching Casey, but he only saw Casey alone. Meanwhile, Marcus was following the homeless man at the church. Then a car arrived and took the homeless man away. After the car left, Marcus went to check on his tent. At this moment, a woman appeared. She knew Marcus and said that everyone here knew Marcus and was afraid of him. Then the woman opened her mouth wide and a boy's voice came from it. The same child whose neck was broken in episode 1. Marcus realized that this woman was also possessed, so he pulled out his crucifix and recited an exorcism. The woman was not only unafraid, but also turned her head towards the crucifix. She wildly mocked Marcus for a while before leaving. Marcus then realized that his exorcism abilities were no longer effective. Marcus went to Tomas's house. He told Tomas that at church that day, the homeless man had recognized the demon inside Casey. Not only was Casey possessed by a demon, but many others were also possessed. At first, Tomas didn't believe Marcus. Marcus told him about his past. When he was very young, his father killed his mother in front of him. Afterward, he was taken to the church and trained for 4 years by a priest named Sean. He only faced a demon alone at the age of 12. He asked Tomas if he was afraid the first time he saw a demon. Tomas said he was very scared. Marcus told him that the first time he saw a demon, he felt a sense of liberation, because in his life, which was both short and long, for the first time he had a purpose. Then the two of them read together words from the Bible: sowing faith amidst doubt, sowing hope where despair lay, sowing light in the darkness. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a black man cycled home. Because he was wearing headphones, he was completely unaware of the unusual activity in his house. His family had all been murdered. He entered his room and was suddenly stabbed several times from behind. Then, the killer removed his internal organs. The accomplice was none other than the homeless man. Afterward, many people appeared, each carrying a box containing organs. Soon, the incident was broadcast on television, showing 9 people brutally murdered and their organs removed. This news caught Marcus's attention. Marcus looked out the window. A poster for the Pope's arrival hung outside. Could the target of these demons be the Pope? A goat's hand rested on Kat's thigh. Kat didn't shy away at all. Her friend asked her why she didn't seem surprised by this behavior. Kat said it felt strange. It seemed a lesbian encounter was imminent. Yes, the other person was a girl, Kat's best friend Julia. Under Julia's teasing words, Kat involuntarily glanced at her body. At that moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Kat couldn't dodge in time and crashed into a lamppost. When Kat regained consciousness, she found Julia dead. This was why Kat always locked herself in her room. Outside the hotel where the Pope's advance team was being received, a vagrant was giving a dramatic speech. He claimed that invaders were coming, that they would seize the world and destroy it. Angela sent someone to escort the vagrant away. At that moment, the vagrant suddenly collapsed to his knees in pain. Was he trying to feign injury? Angela ignored him. The advance team's motorcade had arrived. Father Bennett, as the Pope's security officer, had arrived in Chicago earlier. The vagrant continued his sermon, seemingly discussing Angela's family's current situation.
Come to take your children in the night. They are
Kind of makes you question free speech.
At the hotel reception, everyone was entertaining the Bishop of Rome, who had traveled from afar. This man was not the Pope. The church had a very strict hierarchical system, with many bishops below him. Maria hoped the Pope could stay in the Chicago slums a little longer, but Father Bennett disagreed, saying that such places would pose an additional threat to the Pope's security. Tomas, however, delivered a meaningful speech. The Pope's trip to the slums lasted only 2 hours, but his stay in Morne, Gold Coast lasted a day and a half. The slum dwellers might not have been able to raise as much money, but spiritually they were far more devout than the people of Gold Coast. Just then, a blood-curdling scream rang out from outside the window. Downstairs, a man was standing, self-immolating, the same homeless man who had just given a speech at the gate. He lay there, clutching his Bible, dead in front of everyone. It seemed the Pope's trip to Chicago was certainly not going to be peaceful. Two brothers were mocking the FBI's incompetence. Last night, a group of mysterious individuals came to the black neighborhood and carried out a frenzied massacre. The FBI always acted like a garbage collector. From their conversation, Father Marcus overheard a few details. Those people removed the victim's organs from locations that perfectly matched the parts needed for summoning the demon. It seems the demon is about to act. Casey's personality was still quite conservative. You could tell just by looking at her taste in clothes. At this moment, the old man reappeared. He chose an extremely revealing dress for Casey. Casey looked at the price of $3,600. She couldn't afford it at all. The old man casually tore off the anti-theft tag and handed it to Casey, saying that if she put it in her pocket, no one would find out. The old man's actions were all too clear. He was subtly trying to probe Casey's inner thoughts. Marcus had been invited to Angela's house, where holy water had no effect on Casey. On her dressing table, he discovered a music box, and what was inside caught his attention, prompting him to request to see her. Angela then took Casey to church, where Casey said that she knew her mother suspected she was possessed, but that she was actually perfectly normal, and hoped the questioning would end soon. Tomas appeared somewhat foolish, and asked her to move the pen on the table with her mind, which astonished Marcus. To prevent Tomas from further embarrassing himself in front of the demon, Marcus told Tomas that he would speak to Casey for a few minutes. His words were deliberate, meant to provoke her. When Marcus took out the music box, Casey clearly grew more displeased, as he continued to push her boundaries, eventually producing a broken dressing mirror. He remarked that people said breaking a mirror brought 7 years of bad luck, and questioned who would hate a girl enough to give her such a gift. At that moment, the old man placed his hand on Casey's shoulder, and Casey nervously said that he would not treat her that way. Marcus pressed further, asking whether the person who had given her the mirror was in the room, but Casey remained silent, leading Marcus to realize that the demon was present. Through Casey, Marcus and the other man then entered into a silent confrontation, while her emotional state became increasingly unstable, causing the picture of Jesus on the wall to fall, the lights to flicker, and the mirror on the table to spin. Marcus then switched to another language and told her that the demon was her slave, at which point the demon within Casey finally awakened.
Boy sends his regards. What was his name?
Ah, yes.
Tomas recoiled in fear, then grabbed his camera and recorded everything unfolding before him. The demon knew Marcus's past, such as the failed exorcism in Mexico City. The sound of the child's neck being twisted was a luxury. Every word it spoke pierced Marcus's heart. Then the lights in the room came back on. Marcus suddenly realized he had been a little too hasty. It's true that high-ranking officials use their authority to intimidate others. Marcus had once pointed a gun at Father Bennett. Father Bennett used that as a reason to strip Marcus of all his positions and power. Even though they provided evidence of the demon, Bennett didn't consider it anything. Marcus told him that those people had collected body parts to summon a demon. Moreover, the demon they wanted to summon was only one. Bennett completely ignored Marcus, directly dismissing him. But then he went to find Marcus. In fact, all of this was just a scheme by Father Bennett. He discovered that the church had been infiltrated, so he expelled Marcus from the church, allowing him to conduct a secret investigation in his capacity as a free man. Bennett had been investigating all the recent events in secret. The Pope was a good man. Without him, the world would be in danger. Bennett then gave Marcus an envelope, telling him to find his friend and ask for help. Marcus then set off. Casey, wearing the stolen dress, noticed something like a blister on her neck while she was adjusting her hair. At that moment, the man reappeared. Casey began to self-harm and seemingly found pleasure in it. Later, she and Kat attended Julia's memorial service. Kat watched the performance on stage with tears in her eyes and blamed herself deeply. Casey, however, watched the performance with an expressionless face. Suddenly, a hand reached out from behind her. Casey grew increasingly anxious and was drenched in sweat. She abruptly stood up from her seat. Her father, Henry, immediately followed. They took the subway home. Henry, due to his head injury, quickly fell asleep. At that moment, a group of tough-looking young men boarded the train. train. One of them, seeing Casey's provocative attire, began to harass her. Those around them watched coldly, and no one intervened. Casey felt utterly helpless. Then, the man appeared at the other end of the train car. He slowly walked towards Casey. Then the two shared a passionate kiss. From that moment, the man officially possessed Casey. She immediately sent the thug flying away. Someone tried to intervene, but Casey turned and delivered a fatal blow, sending them flying. At that moment, all the phones of those around recording lost their signal. Then Casey lunged at the thug, not only tearing his chest until it was covered in blood and flesh, but also ripping off his jaw. Henry stepped forward to wake Casey. The lights in the carriage came back on. Everyone was stunned. Casey wet herself right in front of everyone. This episode ended. This episode contains a very subtle detail. From the moment the mysterious man had come into contact with Casey, his suit changed each time he appeared, until it was finally extremely tattered. This also reflected Casey's inner world being gradually invaded and corrupted by the demon. Wanting to know what the spiritual world looked like after being possessed by a demon, Casey then told her own experience. In that world, everyone else highlighted her differences, but she was the only one wearing white. Her father praised her, saying she was like a noble white swan. The food her mother had prepared was even more special. On the plate had been a nest of black chicks squealing hungrily, waiting to be eaten. Casey was so scared that she jumped up. She wondered how she could eat, and thought that if she ate it, she would have to bury it. At that moment, the man pushed her back into her chair and sincerely told her that being picky about food would lead to her death when she grew up. Then he personally tasted the black chicks. As he chewed, he said that chicks hatched from rooster eggs tasted better and that it was disgusting. Casey wanted to leave the table, but was horrified to find her feet had been rooted to the floor. The man asked her why she was resisting him. Casey said that it was not the perfect world he had talked about. It was a completely pathetic version of tragedy. The man slapped Casey to the ground. Veins sprouted from her body and bound her to the floor. Casey tried to lift one arm, enduring the pain, but the man pushed it down again. He warned her that she had to completely submit to him. It was best not to force him to use his ultimate technique. She just needed to nod and say okay. She could do it. That image was exactly like someone's selfish wickedness being punished appropriately. The scene returns to the real world. Casey was taken to a psychiatric hospital and constantly screamed, "No, no." Her condition was extremely bad. The doctor wanted to perform a thorough examination on Casey. He told Angela that they were not allowed to visit Casey for the next 60 hours. Angela knew Casey was not mentally ill, so she called Father Tomas. Angela anxiously asked him if the bishop had agreed to perform an exorcism. Tomas regretfully replied that he had not. The church had only allowed him to pray. Furthermore, Father Marcus had been disowned by the church, but there had still been someone who could help them, so Tomas went to find that person to ask for help. Casey's test results were in. She was severely dehydrated, had numerous skin injuries, the most serious being burns to her genitals. It was clearly self-inflicted, the same burns from the hairdryer in the previous episode. The doctor advised them to consider if anyone in the family had a mental illness. Although Angela was furious, she had no choice but to trust the doctor until an exorcism could be performed on her daughter. Meanwhile, Father Marcus arrived at a convent, the first place Father Bennett had recommended. Marcus had never seen such a rigid exorcism ritual. His own method was to beat the demon to death. This nun, however, used love to subdue it. Even more miraculously, she managed to stabilize the demon's emotions. After the ritual ended, the nun looked at him with a meaningful gaze. Marcus wanted to speak to her privately, but the other nuns told him that when the time was right, he would naturally be able to meet her. So Marcus seriously reviewed the paper Father Bennett had given him and decided to go find the two people connected to the keyword restart. On a tour bus, Marcus found these two people. After Marcus inquired about the organ harvesting from living people, the couple took notice of him. They then invited him into their van. Their education was far from simple. One was a professor of anthropology, the other a professor of theology. They were close friends of Father Bennett. Father Bennett had told him that his request for help meant something significant had happened. Before every major disaster, there are traces of demonic activity. This time was certainly no exception. Marcus then told them about the organ harvesting incident in Chicago. This act could only have one possible explanation: the summoning of demons. This matched what Marcus knew. Marcus returned to the monastery once again. Perhaps the time was ripe. The nun agreed to meet him. Marcus told her that Father Bennett had discovered that the church had been infiltrated by demons. The nun confirmed Bennett's intuition, as there were increasingly more people being possessed by demons, and they were becoming more and more difficult to deal with. Marcus told the nun about Casey's condition. This demon was extremely powerful, unlike anything he had ever encountered before. He was no longer a skilled exorcist. His failure failure to save the child in Mexico had dealt him a huge blow. Furthermore, he had been stripped of his position by the church, Sister Mouse countered, asking if she had given him his powers. Those powers didn't reside within his body, they belonged only to God. If he let go of his ego, perhaps he could regain his powers. So the nun invited Marcus to participate in one of her exorcism rituals to see if he could regain his exorcism abilities. That evening, Marcus participated in an exorcism ritual performed by a nun. The man possessed by a demon relentlessly attacked him. Under Sister Mouse's guidance, Marcus tried her method, embracing the demon and using love to subdue it. Then, a strange wind blew, causing the candle to flicker. The possessed man returned to normal. Marcus had previously used coercion and oppression to perform exorcisms. This method of exorcism using compassion, forgiveness, and patience truly opened his eyes and thus restored his exorcism abilities. To force Casey to cooperate, the demon's tactics became increasingly vile. A kind nurse was preparing an IV drip for Casey. She constantly encouraged Casey, hoping she could be strong. She didn't know Casey was facing a demon she couldn't see. Casey was extremely weak. The demon mocked her. No one would call her a pretty girl anymore. As the nurse prepared to inject Casey, the demon grabbed Casey's arm. No matter how hard the nurse tried, she couldn't get the needle into the vein. It warned Casey that if she continued to resist, she would suffer a fate worse than death. The demon let go, and the nurse was finally able to insert the needle. Casey said she would rather die than believe the demon again. Then the demon grabbed Casey's arm. At this point, her blood flowed back up the tube into the IV bag. Casey was in excruciating pain. Under the demon's torment, she couldn't eat or drink normally. Therefore, the doctors forcibly inserted a feeding tube into her esophagus. When the doctors left, the demon reappeared, even sitting on Casey. Notice how the demon's clothes were now even more tattered. The demon continued to taunt her, saying these torments were just the appetizer. If she didn't cooperate, even more fun awaited her. Casey's spirit was gradually being consumed by the demon. Although all resistance was futile, she had to persevere. At this point, the demon grabbed the kind nurse, threatening her life to force Casey to give up her soul. Seeing the nurse about to be strangled to death, Casey compromised with the demon. The demon extended its hand. A handshake would officially complete the agreement. Just as the demon was about to achieve its goal, Angela burst in, grabbing her daughter's hand. The nurse's actions had drawn their attention. With no other option, the demon retreated. Angela used this as an excuse to take Casey home. Meanwhile, Tomas was engrossed in studying books on exorcism. Perhaps only he could help Casey. Just then, Marcus returned. Marcus asked him if he was studying and if he was ready to face the demon. Although Tomas had no experience in exorcism, he knew that with Marcus there would be no problem. And from that moment on, the two officially formed an exorcism duo. This episode ends here. This film has a rather slow pace, but the plot gets better and better later on. Many people criticize Marcus and Tomas for performing exorcisms just with their words. In my opinion, they relied on faith and belief. The Exorcist, 1973, clearly states that God doesn't directly help people, but he can grant good people unlimited spiritual strength. What the devil does is destroy people's faith. This is very evident in Casey. The devil had first seduced her, and when she had been helpless, it had taken advantage of the situation to possess her body. Human wickedness and selfishness fueled the devil's power. Casey was tormented to the point of being unrecognizable. Her eyes were vacant, staring straight ahead. Her father, Henry, tearfully wiped her face, reciting the Gospel of Matthew while questioning God why the devil targeted Casey. Henry kissed his daughter and turned to leave. At that moment, Casey spoke. Henry nodded and sat down next to the little girl. Casey suddenly used an iron chain to strangle him, a growling sound like a man's voice coming from her throat. She even stuck her yellow tongue into Henry's ear. The demon seemed to have conveyed something ominous. Henry returned to the living room, staring intently at Angela without blinking. Angela felt a chill run down her spine. Henry had never been so unusual, and he hadn't said a word. Meanwhile, Casey on the monitor was staring at Angela, smiling eerily. This family was becoming increasingly abnormal. Through the reflection in the window, Angela saw a grotesque version of herself. The knocking from the next room made Kat extremely uneasy. She still couldn't accept the fact that Casey was possessed by a demon, so she put on her headphones and pretended not to hear anything. Marcus and Tomas were performing an exorcism on Casey, but the demon inside Casey was completely unafraid and kept provoking them. The demon targeted Tomas, who was inexperienced. Faced with the demon's taunts, Tomas was at a loss for words. Marcus saw that the situation was getting out of hand and pulled Casey aside. Marcus wanted to use the exorcism method he had learned from the nun. Unexpectedly, the demon didn't fall for it at all, sending both of them flying. Then it began to torment Casey's body. The demon twisted Casey's thumb 360 degrees. Her toes were almost about to split open. In the demon's eyes, this was just a small game. Downstairs, Angela was tidying up childhood photos of her daughters. Henry suddenly asked Angela a question. Do you believe that God will decide the consequences of every action we take? He asked Angela if she had ever deceived him. Clearly, there was a hidden meaning in his words. Angela was furious, questioning Henry about why he asked that. Was he suspecting it was all her fault? Clearly, the demon had said something unacceptable to Henry. The demon controlled Casey, making her fly around the room. Marcus and Tomas tried to stop it, but it tossed them around. Casey took the opportunity to mount Tomas. The demon told them to give up their attempts at exorcism. The demon was determined not to let Casey go until she surrendered her impure soul. After a night of mischief, the demon finally quieted down, and they restrained Casey. At that moment, Henry happened to discover a Bible in the closet, inside which were a few daisies and a red feather. He glanced at it and put it back. But when he turned to the first page, he seemed to come to a sudden realization. Meanwhile, Marcus held Casey in his arms, silently praying for her. Inside her mind, the demon sat on her and mocked her, while Casey used her last shred of faith to resist it, wondering why it had chosen her and what it wanted. The demon told her not to pretend anymore, because she knew her mission perfectly well, and then roared that he had brought it there, leaving the question of who he referred to. At that moment, a cross appeared on Casey's forehead, revealing that Marcus had drawn it on her in the real world, as if God had begun to show mercy on the poor girl. At the same time, Kat was trying to persuade Angela to stop, saying that Casey's condition required immediate hospitalization and that she hoped her mother would make the right decision. Marcus, who had just come downstairs, overheard their conversation and asked Kat whether she truly knew what the right choice was, adding that she might not believe Casey was possessed, but she had to believe that they would not harm her sister. At that moment, Tomas, alone upstairs, heard a familiar voice calling him. The demon had transformed into Tomas's ex-girlfriend. Under the demon's seduction, Tomas knelt before her. Just then, Marcus burst through the door and witnessed the horrifying scene.
Tomas!
Marcus was furious. He berated Tomas for his lack of resolve, saying that leaving him there was like inviting disaster. So Marcus chased Tomas away. While the two were arguing, Kat secretly opened the door and saw Casey's predicament. Marcus chased everyone out of the room and proceeded to perform the exorcism alone. The demon even transformed into Marcus's mother to mock him.
Your father and I, it were a hard life. You was never supposed to happen.
But Marcus was seasoned in battle. He wasn't fooled by such tricks. Marcus used all his strength to confront the demon inside Casey. This seemed to work. The demon controlled Casey's body, sending her flying. It let out a piercing scream. The surrounding lights went out, but a faint bluish light streamed in through the window. Marcus knew things were wrong. Kat had called the police. Marcus wanted to seize this last chance to wake Casey. Just as he was about to succeed, the FBI stormed in and arrested Marcus. As the paramedics took Casey away, she removed the ventilator, giving Kat a sinister smile. The black car carrying Casey was stopped in the woods. Suddenly, a mysterious force quickly crushed the car, and a heart-wrenching scream echoed from inside. Suddenly, a figure leaped out. Inside the car was a chaotic scene, with severed limbs scattered everywhere. Casey was escaping with a strange gait. Marcus was being held at the police station, watching the news. His mind was in turmoil. It was like letting a tiger out of the forest again. At this moment, Father Bennett had paid the bail for Marcus's release. Marcus told him to go and warn the Pope. Angela was awakened by a nightmare. What terrified her even more was that in the darkness, Henry was staring intently at her. Then he placed the Bible he had found in the wardrobe on the bed. Henry said, "You need to repent," and left the room. Angela felt Henry was right, so she went to church to repent. Coincidentally, Father Tomas was also there repenting. What he was repenting about, she didn't want to say. The two lost souls talked to each other. Angela told Tomas about her past. As a child, she had been possessed by a demon. When she was young, she was extremely lonely and longed for a close friend. Unexpectedly, that friend appeared. He was like a small red bird, almost omnipotent. More precisely, he could make himself omnipotent. As she spoke, she took out the red feather from her hand, and her mother had exploited her demonic possession to make money. Unable to bear her mother's selfishness, she changed her name to Angela and moved to Chicago. This is also why she sensed something unclean in the house from the beginning. Her husband's accident, Kat's car accident, Casey's demonic possession, all of them unconsciously likely seemed to be somehow connected to her. At that moment, a woman dressed entirely in black knocked on Henry's door. She told Henry she was Angela's mother. No matter how you looked at her, she appeared younger than Angela. This episode ends here. This episode shows that the demon's greatest skill is bewitching people. Henry, Thomas, and Kat repeatedly fall victim to its charms. This also causes the exorcism duo Marcus and Tomas to fail before they even begin. At this stage, they are still no match for the demon. After a while of fighting them, the demon successfully escaped. Moreover, the demon's power has become much stronger. It can transform mental energy into physical attacks, easily killing even a carload of people. To find a missing white girl, the district under the mayor's jurisdiction has offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to her disappearance. This has caused extreme dissatisfaction among the black residents. 2 days earlier, 9 black people were massacred and their organs removed. That case remains unsolved. Yet the sheriff has announced he will dedicate all resources to the missing girl's case. The black residents are adamant about this. They surround the assembly hall with pictures of the victims. A black woman questioned the white crowd on stage. "Aren't we people of color also human beings? We are all legal citizens of Chicago and devout believers in God. Why aren't we treated equally?" As the black woman read out the names of the victims, the perpetrator was burning the body parts to ashes and placing them in an exquisite urn. It seemed they were about to act. No matter how dissatisfied the black community was, they had to continue the search. Casey had been missing for 4 days, without the help of exorcists, relying only on her own will. She was completely powerless against the demon. The ultimate outcome would be that the demon would merge with Casey, an eternal union. If she wasn't found quickly, there would be no hope of salvation. Angela told Father Marcus that when she was possessed, everyone thought her soul was gone, but she knew she was still there. Marcus told her to think carefully about the details and see if she could help, but Angela's expression clearly showed she didn't want to continue. Marcus angrily stormed out the door. Tomas asked him, "What should we do now?" Marcus said the demon would disrupt the natural order, like strange gatherings, for example, birds, dogs, and people converging. He needed police equipment to help. Tomas wanted to help, but Marcus refused. Not because he had made an unforgivable mistake, but because he was carrying too many burdens at the moment. He had a family, a parish, and a deeply loved one. He was an excellent pastor, but he couldn't become an exorcist. After saying this, Marcus went alone to search for Casey's whereabouts. Kat was watching a television program from decades ago. The girl possessed in it was Angela's mother. Grandma used Angela's experiences to write a book. The stories in it kept readers awake at night. Because of this, Grandma made a lot of money. Kat asked Grandma if these things were true. Grandma said it was all true, including the ill-gotten gains. There was a Ouija board in the basement, and Angela often sat there talking to an imaginary friend. Grandma had neglected Angela because she was busy making films. By the time she realized something was wrong, Angela was no longer normal. Grandma deeply regretted not being there for Angela as she grew up, and now she has to spend the rest of her life making up for her mistake. All these words reached Angela's ears as she hid outside the door. Perhaps their mother-daughter relationship could still be mended. In a city of 3 million people, finding a girl who had been missing for 4 days was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Father Bennett said this was God's test for Marcus. There were no shortcuts on the path of exorcism. Bennett invited the Van couple to help. Through their investigation, they discovered several suspicious things. 10 years earlier, a transport company called Tattersall had gone bankrupt. But recently, many trucks belonging to that company had appeared in Chicago. The people who had boarded the trucks all disappeared. 3 years earlier, when Tattersall's assets had belonged to Walters Industries, the main owners had been Maria and her husband. Why Maria and her husband had bought a bankrupt company remained unclear. Moreover, after the purchase, the business license had never been changed. They had not been doing business, but rather concealing something. Furthermore, this company had donated $18 million to the Franciscan order. Where that money had come from remained a question. Bennett suddenly realized that that night's papal event was sponsored by this Franciscan order. Thinking about it carefully, it was terrifying. Father Bennett wanted to hear what Marcus thought about this. Meanwhile, Marcus was focused on eavesdropping on the police's frequency. The scene shifts to the church, where a call center had been set up to find Casey. Angela received a call from a stranger. The man asked if she felt that God was punishing her, said she had once been a spoiled girl, and asked whether she wanted him to stay in her body forever, adding that Casey was the same. Angela begged him not to hurt her daughter. The man said he could give Casey back to her, and asked if she was sure she wanted that, then told her she should turn back. Angela woke up with a start. It turned out it had been just a dream. At that moment, 2 volunteers were discussing a pack of stray dogs that had gone mad. These words made Thomas feel something was wrong. He quickly texted Marcus. Near the north tunnel, a pack of stray dogs had gone mad. Marcus immediately went to investigate. The place was filled with an eerie atmosphere. Rats were fleeing from the tunnel entrance. Marcus realized the situation was serious. After entering the tunnel, Marcus felt something was increasingly amiss. A large crowd of homeless people had gathered there. These people were extremely strange. Their behavior was as if they had been possessed by demons. One of them kept saying, "Stop him! Stop him!" The homeless people immediately began attacking Marcus. Marcus was knocked down and shouted loudly, "In the name of Jesus, I command you to retreat." The homeless people obediently moved aside. Even Marcus could not believe that this command had had any effect. However, it was not Marcus's words that had made them retreat, but the real demon that had appeared. Marcus recognized it as Casey. Casey, like a spider, the Franciscan order was described as having been founded in the early 13th century, with its monks wearing gray robes, which earned them the name Grey Friars. They were said to advocate a life of celibacy and to refer to one another as little brothers, forming what was also known as the Little Brotherhood. However, in Chicago, the Franciscans were in fact influential and wealthy figures, including even the former police chief. Bencott stood looking at a poster announcing the Pope's arrival, lost in thought, realizing that if the Franciscan order was facing problems, then the visit would have to be stopped. At that moment, a professor from the University of Chicago's theological school delivered a statement that deeply shocked Bennett as he recounted the story of Jesus and the fallen angels, explaining that these fallen angels possessed the power to rebel against Jesus. Father Bennett reacted with clear displeasure and questioned whether the professor was aware that fallen angels were also known as demons. The professor dismissed the concern, stating that the way one chose to refer to them was a matter of personal freedom. Sensing the professor's lack of faith, Bennett asked whether he had ever encountered a demon, to which the professor calmly replied that he had. Bennett then left the party, while the others watched him go. After his departure, the gathering proceeded into a formal meeting, and a latecomer was warmly welcomed. He was the old man accompanied by the 2 pupils seen earlier. He asked whether everyone present had come entirely of their own free will, and they all affirmed that they had. The old man then opened a package containing an exquisite urn of ashes, and at that moment, 2 pupils appeared in his eyes. As everyone watched in anticipation, he blew the ashes into the air, and each person silently hoped to be chosen.
It is my turn. I've waited. Take me. Pick me.
In the end, the ashes selected the police chief, who, after a brief convulsion, also revealed 2 pupils in his eyes. It became clear that everything had been orchestrated by the Franciscan order, and that what they were performing was a ritual to summon a demon. The people present burst into laughter and embraced one another, while only Maria quietly shed tears of regret, raising the question of why she would willingly allow herself to be possessed by a demon. On the other side, Marcus followed the footprints and found Casey. She was gnawing on the carcass of a bird. Seeing Marcus, Casey lunged at him. Marcus flipped her over, pinned her to the water, and continuously chanted exorcism incantations, trying to borrow God's power to awaken Casey. Casey was submerged in the erupting water, and the shockwave killed all the fish around her. Casey then woke up. The real demon had infiltrated the church. A large number of demons had appeared in the Franciscan order in Chicago. The organ harvesting murders were caused by them, with the aim of summoning more demons. Casey had been missing for 4 days, but had not been completely possessed. This showed that what the demon wanted was not her soul. Marcus had briefly expelled the demon from her body. So, whether Marcus and his associates would discover the demons within the Franciscan order, whether the demon would reclaim Casey's body, and whose soul the demon was truly targeting remained unknown. The exorcist couple brought Casey to the monastery. Looking at Marcus's facial wounds, it was clear he'd just been severely beaten by the demon. Tomas cursed the demon's shamelessness, wondering why it would relentlessly pursue a girl. The abbess, seeing Casey's astonished expression, understood Marcus's distress. Marcus advised Tomas to stop wasting words and instead think about how to help herself. Tomas had a sudden idea. Maybe she should inform the girl's family. Marcus almost spat fire. Didn't he see? The demon didn't want Casey Casey's soul, otherwise it wouldn't have dragged on for so long. 40 years ago, the demon hadn't succeeded in possessing Angela. It had come for revenge. It wanted to torment the girl right in front of Angela. Wasn't he walking right into the demon's trap by bringing them here? The momentary dispelling of the demon at the lake showed that God still had mercy on this girl. They still had a chance. Then they proceeded to perform an exorcism on Casey. This time, the abbess also participated. At this point, the demon was incredibly powerful. Despite being exposed in the monastery and undergoing exorcism rituals, it could still manipulate objects at will to attack the exorcist. Tomas, caught off guard, was bitten very hard. It eagerly sucked blood. Unsurprisingly, this exorcism failed. Given Casey's current physical condition, if they wanted to continue the exorcism, they couldn't be so careless. Otherwise, it would cost Casey her life. Marcus told Tomas, who was tending to the wounds, "Do you know what it's like when God allows you to feel his presence? That feeling makes me fearless. It allows me to clearly feel Casey's soul beating. Even if it was only for a brief moment, I was able to snatch her back from the demon. I truly felt God." Tomas had said during his sermons that God would make believers feel his presence in various ways. Marcus's way of feeling God was no exception. This also showed that Marcus's will and his exorcism power were stronger than ever. Casey's body was about to be destroyed by the demon. Signs of decay had already begun to appear on her. The demon had been unusually quiet lately. Could it be hiding deep within Casey, afraid to show itself? Marcus knew that the decay of Casey's body was only the beginning of the process. If he couldn't force the demon out, Casey would die. Marcus discovered that the abbess was giving Casey sedatives. If Casey couldn't regain consciousness, there would be no way to perform an exorcism. The abbess advised him to let Casey be freed. Her condition had reached a point of no return. She was suffering too much. God wouldn't allow his children to be tormented, nor would he be heartless enough to watch a decaying corpse before his eyes. She had a painless herbal remedy that could quickly free Casey. Marcus, of course, disagreed. The abbess said that from now on, the convent would only be responsible for treating Casey's wounds. As for the exorcism, she and the nuns would no longer participate. She hoped Marcus would question his conscience, wondering whether continuing like this was ultimately for his own good or Casey's. Meanwhile, the police chief and Maria were studying the Pope's schedule and security arrangements along the way. Father Bennett disagreed with their plan, as the Pope's stay posed a significant risk, and the security measures surrounding the police were being completely disregarded. The police chief warned Bennett not to question his work. The Pope's schedule was more meticulously planned than even the president's security. Except for Bennett, everyone present agreed with the police chief's arrangements. Father Bennett wanted to know what the old man opposite him was doing there. His name was Friar Simon, the same man who had summoned the demon in the previous episode. Maria introduced Friar Simon as being in charge of fundraising for the Franciscan order. The funds for the Pope's trip were all from his donations. Bennett immediately raised his suspicions. According to the committee's records he had checked, Tattersall had donated $27 million. This was the largest donation the committee had ever made. Maria was the one who knew this best, because her husband had been a director on the Tattersall board of directors for 9 years. But that company had gone bankrupt 10 years ago. So why would a bankrupt company donate such a large sum of money? From the exchange of glances between them, it was clear Bennett suspected them, and these devils also felt that Father Bennett knew a little too much. So Father Bennett made the first move. He followed the Tattersall company's truck to a warehouse. There he discovered an organ incinerator and fragments of unburned organs. When he opened the door of a warehouse, the sight inside shocked him even more. Human corpses were piled high. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind Bennett. The man wielded an iron bar and struck Bennett forcefully. Bennett, being the Pope's close bodyguard, managed to parry the physical blow. Just as he was about to retaliate and kill the attacker, several more figures appeared in the room. He shielded himself and escaped. With agile movements, Bennett quickly subdued one of them. The other, due to the difference in strength, stabbed Bennett. After taking him down, Bennett discovered he was also possessed by a demon. Bennett then proceeded to perform an exorcism. True to his reputation as the Pope's close bodyguard, his exorcism abilities were incredibly powerful. It only took him a few minutes to expel the demon. The director refused to help Marcus with the exorcism anymore, leaving them to do it themselves. Casey was very weak at this point. Tomas also advised Marcus to let Casey be freed. While they were debating whether Casey should be allowed to die peacefully, Casey cried. She desperately pleaded, "Don't give up on me." Marcus had no intention of giving up. He needed Casey's spirit to continue fighting the demons, but Casey's condition was truly dire. Tomas hoped Casey's family could see her one last time. When he arrived at Casey's house, Angela suddenly lost control. She told Tomas that when Casey disappeared, she could feel that Casey was still alright. That feeling feeling was incredibly strong, but today, for some reason, that feeling suddenly vanished, as if a part of her body had disappeared, as if Casey was no longer there. At the same time, Marcus, following the director's advice, prepared to end Casey's life. As he was about to put the medicine to Casey's mouth, his hands became somewhat uncontrollable. He said he felt God controlling his hands. Marcus had no intention of intervening. At that moment, Casey, who had been barely alive, suddenly burst into laughter. Tomas pushed the door open, followed by Angela. Casey abruptly sat up. This slap left Marcus stunned. Angela's appearance awakened the demon. Angela asked her daughter with concern how she felt. Casey spoke in the demon's voice. This was Angela's original name. It seemed they had quite a karmic connection. At this point, the entire family had arrived. Seeing that everyone was gathered, the demon began its psychological tactics. It first mocked them, remarking that even the grandmother of the great star had come, then ridiculed Kat's poor driving skills, recalling how that night she had been driving while admiring her best friend's body and had nearly crashed into herself. It was then revealed that the accident which killed Kat's best friend had been caused by the demon. It went on to mock the foolish father, explaining that it had been the one to loosen the bolts on the scaffolding, which led to Henry being struck and left dazed, repeatedly asking whether they were surprised. Only then did they realize that all the misfortune that had befallen this family had been brought by the demon. It then used its power to fling everyone away. Angela warned the demon to leave Casey's body immediately, but the demon asked whether she knew what hell looked like, explaining that Casey was currently trapped there, locked in a windowless room with her limbs bound to the ground, unable to move, and adding that a similar room had already been prepared for her as well. Marcus then drove everyone out, as they had to continue the exorcism for Casey, while Angela told Henry to go back and pack their belongings, saying that once the exorcism was successful, they would take Casey and leave this troubled place. Meanwhile, inside the room, the two exorcists began arguing. Marcus angrily scolded Tomas for bringing Casey's family there, while Tomas replied that he was not as heartless as Marcus and that Casey had the right to see her family one last time. The demon, meanwhile, laughed triumphantly. Marcus suddenly stopped, realizing that he had been influenced by the demon's power, and he snapped Tomas out of it as well. At that moment, they understood that they had no effective way to deal with the demon. Tomas suggested that since Angela had defeated the demon once before, she might be able to do so again, which only pleased the demon even more. Angela, as if anticipating that they would come to her, stated that she was ready. Before entering the room, Marcus warned her that he could not predict how dangerous things would become, cautioning her not to assume that because she had driven it away once, she could succeed again, and advising her to abandon everything and leave immediately if the situation became too dangerous. As soon as Angela stepped through the door, the demon gave her a harsh and intimidating welcome, clearly growing more excited. Her task was to distract it so the others could begin the exorcism on Casey. Meanwhile, the demon launched a psychological attack on Angela, and after only a few exchanges, she was already on the verge of breaking down. It dug into the pain she had long buried deep inside, making her increasingly uneasy and irritable, while it seemed to take great pleasure in crushing her spirit. Marcus and the others noticed that the demon had momentarily loosened its focus, so they began loudly reciting the exorcism rites, causing the demon within Casey to show clear signs of agony. The room started to shake violently, and Angela also began to pray as the demon struggled fiercely. Under its influence, the room became more and more wrecked. Suddenly, the demon fell silent and fixed Angela with a strange smile, as if time between them had frozen. It began communicating with her in a voice that no one else could hear, proposing a game meant only for the two of them. In the next moment, Angela found herself transported to a basement, where she saw her younger self playing with a Ouija board, the very moment she had first encountered her invisible friend. The man who called himself Captain Howdy was in fact the demon, with a small red bird perched on his shoulder. Angela asked what it truly wanted, and the demon made it clear that it wanted her to remember the past. At that time, Angela's mother had opened the basement door and called her by her real name, Regan, but the one who answered had been the demon. It became evident that Angela had been possessed as a child, and even more disturbingly, that it had been voluntary. Her mother had eventually cursed her as a filthy little demon before leaving. The demon then explained that it had given Angela those memories and asked what her most beautiful memory was, adding that what angered it the most was that she had run away. Angela begged it to spare her family, but the demon refused, arguing that she could not simply walk away after everything she had done. It then licked her and remarked that her scent had changed, saying it now smelled more like death. In an instant, Angela was pulled back into reality. The demon was still struggling, but the group's exorcism efforts had begun to take effect. Tomas found a passage in Marcus's Bible and started using it to continue the ritual on Casey, causing the demon to appear unable to endure the pain. It then said its farewell and began twisting Casey's neck, but Angela rushed forward and embraced her daughter, preventing it from succeeding. The others continued reciting the incantations, and once they completed the entire passage, Casey broke free from her restraints and rose into the air. After a moment of violent struggle, her eyes returned to normal, yet Angela stood there in a daze, leaving the question of whether everything had truly ended, despite the apparent success of the exorcism. Elsewhere, Father Bennett, injured, sought help from a couple with a van and told them what he had witnessed at Tattersall Company. They then contacted the police, reporting that they had discovered dozens of bodies and immediately destroyed the phone's SIM card afterward. After tending to his wounds, Bennett returned to the bishop. Where news about Tattersall Company was being broadcast on television, he showed the bishop photos from the scene, noting that similar corpse farms had appeared before, though never on such a large scale. However, the bishop seemed more concerned with another issue, asking who had reported the incident to the police. Bennett explained that it had been an anonymous call and added that the members of the Franciscan order could no longer be trusted, as they were all connected to Tattersall Company. He proposed that they should no longer be allowed to approach the bishop. Watching the news, Bennett realized that time was running out, while the bishop looked at him with a subtly altered expression. At the same time, the police identified a suspect in the Tattersall case, who turned out to be the homeless man. In front of everyone, he shot himself, and his blood stained the inverted cross a deep red. Meanwhile, Father Bennett and the bishop began leaving Chicago, with the bishop expressing deep regret, noting that the Pope had wished to see the city's architecture in person, but would unfortunately not have the chance. Bennett sensed that something was wrong, but it was already too late, as the man beside him suddenly pulled a hood over his head, revealing that the bishop had also been corrupted by the demon. At the same time, Casey's condition began to improve, and the family prepared to leave the city as planned. While Angela was packing, her mother wanted to have a proper conversation with her, but Angela's behavior seemed strangely off, making her mother feel that everything she said was unnecessary. Angela responded that of course she would forget everything her mother had said, then stepped behind her and referred to her as a filthy little demon. In that instant, her mother realized that the person in front of her was no longer her daughter. Angela then snapped her neck, and her eyes revealed two pupils, making it clear that the demon had merged with her and that she had willingly accepted the possession. The demon then controlled Casey and delivered a final threat to Angela. Just as it was about to twist Casey's neck, Angela rushed forward and held her tightly, repeatedly saying that it should take her instead. At that moment, time seemed to freeze, and in the blink of an eye, Casey in her arms transformed into the demon's form, visible only to Angela, as it chose who could see it. The demon was then forced out of Casey's body, and, in the next instant, entered Angela instead, showing that, in order to save her daughter, she had willingly offered herself to the demon. Monica's death abroad drew the attention of the FBI. The police chief and a black detective questioned Angela, who tearfully recounted the events, explaining that she had only heard a noise before her mother fell down the stairs. She asked them to show some understanding for her family, saying they had suffered too many misfortunes recently. She then asked the chief to hand her a tissue, and when their hands touched, he immediately realized that she was someone he should not offend. He ordered the detective to end the interrogation at once, and although the detective said he still had questions, the chief insisted that no further questioning would take place. He then reassured Angela's family, saying he would do his best to help them through their difficulties, and before leaving, he told Angela to stay in touch, suggesting that the demon had now found an organization to rely on. Meanwhile, Henry had been recording something from the very beginning. The next day, they brought Casey home from the hospital, and several several dogs were seen staring intently at Angela at the door, which aligned with Marcus's earlier remark that the demon could influence the behavior of animals. That evening, they invited Father Tomas to dinner, during which Henry mentioned that he had completed the immigration procedures for the whole family. However, Angela immediately rejected the idea, stating that she had no intention of moving anymore. The family was confused by her sudden change, as it had originally been her suggestion, and at that moment, Casey began to sense that something was wrong with her mother. After the meal, Tomas went to say goodbye to Henry. Back in the first episode, it had been Henry who guided Tomas to find Marcus, and this time, Henry once again gave him a clue, which was the number 162. Father Bennett's disappearance left the Van couple extremely worried, and at the same time, they continued investigating the inner workings of the Franciscan order. They followed Friar Simon and discovered that many members of the order were gathering together. While they were taking photos of him, Simon noticed them as well and revealed his double pupils, making them realize the danger. They immediately sent a message to Marcus and fled, while Friar Simon did not pursue them, as this gathering involved matters of greater importance. At that moment, a familiar voice was heard, and Angela's sudden appearance took everyone somewhat by surprise. The police chief showed her great respect, while Friar Simon, with his experience, recognized at a glance that the demon inside her was Pazuzu, the demon of disease. It was also revealed that the demon Karis had once encountered, Lamashtu, was in fact Pazuzu's consort, and that Karis had used Pazuzu's seal to subdue her. Pazuzu is known as a powerful demon, associates with disease in Mesopotamia, which is also identified as the origin of the demonic lore depicted in the film The Exorcist. Friar Simon said that he had thought she had abandoned them, recalling that after her argument with Father Marin years ago, she had disappeared. Angela replied that a little bird had told her about their plan, and that she had come because of it. From her tone, Friar Simon sensed that she had come to take advantage of the situation. He felt that the assassination plan he had spent 6 years orchestrating could not simply be taken from him, and that the credit should belong to him. Angela then asked what level he thought he was at, and whether he had any sense of dignity, adding that he could boast when she was not around, but now he had to kneel before her. Before Friar Simon could react, the person beside him had already knelt down. Angela glanced around and saw that all those possessed by demons had also knelt. Under immense pressure, Friar Simon was forced to kneel at her feet and kiss them, which finally satisfied her. Maria, seeing this, intended to step forward and perform the gesture as well, but Angela told her that she did not need to bother. She then asked whether Maria wanted to know why she had not been chosen, explaining that they valued the taste of power and potential, while Maria's was too ordinary, and that she could never become one of them. After that, Angela laid out her plan for everyone. She wanted to send a message to those who had once opposed her, and decided to begin with the hypocritical nuns, marking the location of the convent on the map. Father Tomas was about to be promoted, and Marcus told him that the higher his position, the greater the temptations would be, advising him to stay clear-headed and not lose himself. At that moment, Marcus received a message from the Van couple, which included a photo showing Friar Simon's double pupils. This time, he chose not to tell Tomas about it. Believing that Tomas was not always obedient, Marcus then went alone to find the couple, only to discover that they had already been killed. Realizing that such a fate was almost unavoidable when confronting demons, all he could do was pray for them before gathering his equipment and preparing to leave. At that moment, he noticed the cross given to him by the Mother Superior and realized that danger had already befallen her. Meanwhile, to thank the convent for saving her daughter, Angela brought some pastries as a gesture of gratitude. However, the Mother Superior never took her eyes off Angela's gaze, as she had already recognized the demon within her the moment she entered. The Mother Superior remarked that she could have killed her, but had perhaps missed the opportunity out of compassion. With her identity exposed, Angela stopped pretending and said that what she hated most was seeing these nuns, who pretended to be virtuous, still living so well. The Mother Superior responded that she was nothing more than a childish and petulant being, while Angela shook her head and said she was not being petulant but celebrating her victory. She then killed the Mother Superior, and at that moment, the other nuns entered the room, only to see Angela stand up and smile at them. Not long after, Marcus arrived at the convent, but it was already too late, as everyone there had been killed. Realizing that the time had come to take action, he began tracking Friar Simon, and seized the moment when Simon was alone in his room to launch a sudden attack. Marcus's move was swift and ruthless, leaving Friar Simon stunned, and under pressure, Simon quickly confessed that he had killed the Van couple, while the massacre at the convent had not been his doing, but rather the work of their old acquaintance Angela. He also revealed that their plan was to assassinate the Pope the next day, and that Angela had taken over this mission. At that moment, Simon's subordinates rushed in and subdued Marcus, tying him up. Simon then told Marcus that years ago he had encountered the Pope and had offered him a chance to escape the mortal world and gain eternal life. But the Pope had refused, and now that same opportunity stood before Marcus, leaving it uncertain whether he would make the same mistake. Simon then took a handful of ashes, preparing to summon a demon. Meanwhile, Father Tomas accepted the church's arrangements and was preparing to assume the position of bishop. At that moment, an office staff member brought him a book, and when Tomas asked what it was, the staff member explained that it had been written by Angela's mother. Tomas clarified that he was not referring to the book, but to the feather in the man's hand, and the staff member replied that the feather had been found inside the book. Sensing something was wrong, Tomas began flipping through it and recalled the number 162 that Henry had mentioned, so he turned to that page. There, it stated that the demon would never rest or stop and would do everything in its power to possess Regan until the end of time, making Tomas realize that the situation had become extremely serious. At this point, Casey came to a realization. After the demon left her body, she became able to perceive it and understood that her mother had been possessed, so she told her father and Kat to pack their things and leave the house. Just as they were about to go, the door suddenly shut on its own, and Angela walked down the stairs, fixing the three of them onto the sofa. While they were being subjected to the demon's intimidation, Father Tomas arrived in time.
Angela!
Just as Angela was about to harm her family, Tomas attempted to speak with the demon inside Angela, and the demon told him that he was speaking both to it and to Angela, explaining that Angela was not possessed, but had merged with it, meaning she could no longer be saved, and that no amount of prayer would help. Tomas refused to believe this, so the demon proposed that they put his faith to the test. Tomas tried to strike first, but before he could even finish a few lines of prayer, he was overpowered by the demon and lost consciousness. The demon then lightly touched his forehead, and Tomas suddenly awoke from what seemed like a nightmare. Realizing that everything had been an illusion created by the demon, he found himself back in his childhood home in Mexico, and just as he was questioning the impossibility of it, a familiar voice came from behind him. The person who appeared was Marcus, but something about him felt off, as he continuously mocked Tomas's weakness and told him that such a union was eternal, adding that even someone as skilled as himself could not defeat the demon, and that Tomas, merely a low-ranking priest, should stop wasting his efforts. Tomas understood that it was all a dream, and that the man before him was not the real Marcus, while the figure responded by saying that Tomas himself was not truly an exorcist either. In reality, Angela placed a knife into Tomas's hand, and in the dream, he found himself holding one as well. Meanwhile, Angela was not idle, as she pretended to tell her family that she did not want to hurt anyone. Henry angrily accused her of hypocrisy, pointing out that she had nearly killed Casey and had even taken over Angela's body. Kat firmly stated that Marcus would eventually find and kill her, adding that the demon was not as powerful as it claimed, since it had once been terrified by a 12-year-old girl, referring to the time it had been driven off by Angela at that age. This remark angered the demon, which moved to attack Kat, but its hand suddenly stopped mid-air. It seemed to find the situation increasingly interesting, as if it were now surrounded by enemies on all sides. Within Angela's consciousness, the demon was steadily pushing her to the brink. She had locked herself inside a room, while the demon relentlessly pounded on the door, which served as her final line of defense. If the demon broke through, Angela would be completely merged with it. In Tomas's dream, he continued to endure the taunts of the demon, disguised as Marcus, with each word striking at his psychological defenses. The demon brought up his grandmother, saying that she had never hoped he would become the Pope of Mexico, but had only wished to hold his hand one last time before she died, and questioned where he had been at that moment, suggesting that she had died and her body had decayed without anyone knowing. Tomas was on the verge of collapse, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. The demon then created further illusions to deepen his sense of remorse, causing him to break down in tears. Seeing that the moment was right, the demon began to manipulate him into taking his own life. In reality, Tomas also raised the knife toward himself, but Casey, seeing this, called out to him loudly, urging him to stay conscious. In the dream, Tomas seemed to hear her voice voice and slowly opened his eyes, where he saw the image of a church cross. As if a beam of light were shining down on him, he suddenly realized that taking his own life was a grave sin that would condemn his soul to hell, and that God would not allow such an act, so he threw the knife from his hand. Seeing that the plan had failed, the demon resorted to even more extreme provocation. It produced a hammer and forced the family into a twisted game of Russian roulette, in which whoever the hammer pointed at would be struck by someone else. When it stopped and pointed toward Kat, the demon ordered Casey to take the hammer and break her sister's leg. Casey naturally refused, so the demon took control of Henry and threatened that if she did not comply, it would tear off his arm. In order to save her father, Kat seized the hammer and broke her own leg. As the demon prepared to begin another round, Casey stepped in front of everyone, called out to her mother, and urged her to stay strong, saying that she believed she could defeat the demon once again. This enraged the demon, which pinned Casey to the ground and attempted to gouge out her eyes. At that critical moment, Tomas reached a realization. He understood what he had to do, and that he needed to let go of all burdens and fully devote himself to becoming an exorcist. With renewed faith, he gained the strength to confront the demon. Elsewhere, the people of Chicago were preparing to welcome the Pope, while Marcus had been captured by a group of demons and tied up in a warehouse, along with Father Bennett, who appeared to have been severely beaten. Despite his condition, Bennett joked that he had finally uncovered a traitor within the church, and Marcus responded with a bitter smile that he had already realized that himself. Friar Simon took out the organs and ashes used to summon the demon and told the two men that one of them was the Pope's security officer and the other was the greatest exorcist in Rome. He then said that he would give them two choices. The first was to willingly merge with the demon and accept an eternal baptism, through which they would gain wealth and power beyond imagination. The second was death, though he added that even death would not come easily. He then drew a small knife and cut both Marcus and Bennett on the arm, explaining that a choice often came down to a single thought, but their bleeding would not give them much time to think, as their consciousness would gradually fade. Taking advantage of this, Simon attempted to manipulate them, claiming that the church had always exploited them and would discard them once they were no longer useful. Marcus, having seen enough of the world, was not deceived and said that he had already defeated demons like him when he was 12, and that his life belonged to God, not to any corrupt church. These words caused Friar Simon to pause, but he quickly decided not to waste any more time and began the summoning ritual. Once the demon was summoned, he planned to lead everyone in the assassination of the Pope. At that moment, Maria tried to stop him, arguing that she had contributed greatly and should have been the one to merge with the demon. Simon responded that she needed to understand her place, asking whether she had ever seen a plow ox sit on equal footing with a farmer before. Leaving with the others, the summoned demon then had to choose between Marcus and Bennett's will began to falter first. Marcus kept urging him not to give in to the demon's temptation, but Bennett, having lost too much blood, was becoming delirious. Marcus then noticed Maria standing there in a daze and realized that the situation could still change. Since Maria had originally wanted to merge with the demon, Marcus used psychological persuasion to restore her confidence, prompting her to compete with Bennett for the demon. In the end, the demon chose the more devout Maria, and taking advantage of the moment, they attacked the guards and freed themselves from their restraints. Bennett then urged Marcus to go and save the Pope first. At that moment, the Pope's motorcade had reached the city center, and the demons began to act. The ultrasonic waves they emitted caused unbearable pain to everyone present, rendering the Pope's security guards unable to fight. Just as Friar Simon was at the height of his triumph, Marcus arrived in time and slit his throat with a cross. The guards then regained their senses and escorted the Pope away safely. Meanwhile, Angela's house was being destroyed by the demon. Tomas continued performing the exorcism on Angela while urging Casey and the others to leave. However, thinking of Tomas facing the demon alone, Casey, who had already left, turned back. She picked up a Bible from the ground and, together with her family, began to read aloud, uniting their will against the demon. Tomas's resolve grew stronger, and he no longer felt fear or hesitation, while the demon became increasingly weakened and lost its ability to fight back. Within Angela's consciousness, she realized she had had enough of a life of running away. She wanted the demon to understand that harming her family would come at a price, so she gathered all her courage and confronted it directly. In reality, the demon was being suppressed by everyone, while in her mind, Angela overpowered it and struck it repeatedly. Never had a demon appeared so defeated. After venting all her anger, she locked it inside the room. Back in reality, the double pupils in Angela's eyes gradually disappeared, signaling that the demon had been completely defeated. Outside Angela's house, Casey asked Marcus whether everything was truly over. Marcus looked at her and said that it really was, adding that after more than 40 years of performing exorcisms, he had never met anyone as strong and determined as she was, and that she might be the strongest person he had ever encountered. After saying this, he embraced her and said his farewell. Father Bennett also had to return to the Pope, and after they gathered briefly, he left. Marcus, too, intended to leave Chicago, but Tomas asked him to stay and train him, explaining that he wanted to become a true exorcist. Marcus asked why he had suddenly become so resolute, and Tomas replied that when he had driven the demon out of Angela, he had seen God and believed that he had been chosen. Marcus then agreed to his request. Meanwhile, Angela's family moved to a new place and began a new life. Sometime later, Tomas, now a young exorcist, walked outside an unfamiliar church where the walls were covered with colorful handprints made by children. Not far away, Cindy was holding a child and greeting him. A mischievous little boy suddenly struck a small painted horse with a stick, breaking its front leg, and a stream of black liquid began to flow out from it. The children screamed in terror as what appeared to be a human head emerged from the dark fluid. Tomas stared at it in horror, sensing that it had come specifically for him. At that moment, Cindy's eyes turned white, and she began to pray in a voice that was not her own. Remember the radio on the table? This is the final turning point for Father Tomas. Suddenly, Marcus grumbled and woke Tomas, reminding him that he was driving and could not afford to lose focus at a moment like this. Beneath Marcus was Cindy, the woman he was currently performing an exorcism on. At the same time, Cindy's husband was chasing them frantically and even firing shots in their direction. Thanks to Father Tomas's skillful driving, they managed to shake him off for the time being. To keep Cindy from making noise, Marcus covered her mouth, but she bit him hard in return. After her husband finally disappeared, Marcus angrily scolded Father Bennett, pointing out that the intelligence he had provided never mentioned that Cindy's husband was the police chief, which meant the situation had escalated, as the entire city's police force was now pursuing them. At that moment, the demon spoke, casting a meaningful glance at Tomas. It became clear that Cindy had been deeply corrupted, and an exorcism had to be performed as soon as possible. From their conversation, it was revealed that Cindy had lost her child, and the demon had taken advantage of her extreme grief to enter her. The two men then tied Cindy up inside a warehouse, where Tomas recounted to Marcus what he had seen while distracted earlier. Marcus believed it was simply due to lack of sleep over several days, but Tomas insisted that it must have been some kind of sign. Just then, Cindy regained consciousness and pleaded with them to help her, explaining that her organs were failing and her body was beginning to rot, so they would need to stabilize her condition before proceeding with the exorcism. Tomas then went to find medicine to support her. However, at that moment, the demon took control of Cindy's body again, and Marcus realized that Tomas had previously entered her spiritual realm, something extremely dangerous for an inexperienced exorcist like him. The scene then shifts to a small island where 4 school children were discussing a local legend about a witch. According to the story, the witch forced children to line up from the youngest to the oldest, made them drink poison, and then threw their bodies into a well, and it was said that anyone who could stand on the edge of the well for 10 seconds would hear the final breaths they took before dying. The rebellious older girl told the blind boy that they had all already done it, and that if he could do the same, he would be accepted by them. The blind boy then carefully climbed onto the edge of the dry well and began counting down, but the black boy immediately stepped in to stop him. Just as they were calling each other to head home, the chubby boy kicked a ball toward a wooden house. The foster family was saying grace before their meal, and among them, Shelby was the most devout. That day, a foster care investigator named Rose came to visit. The living conditions in the house were quite good, but the children did not seem very satisfied with their foster guardian, Andy, especially the blind boy Caleb. When he learned that his biological family would not be taking him back, he became both angry and discouraged. After dinner, Rose walked around the house and noticed that all the paintings were signed Nikki. At that moment, she heard a strange sound and discovered discovered that Caleb was playing with a record player, though she still felt that there was something unusual about him. Meanwhile, Andy was looking through his computer, where he saw a photo of himself with a woman named Nikki, suggesting that she was the one who had created all the paintings in the house. At that point, a peculiar little girl, resembling a small monkey, appeared in front of him. She was also one of the children he had taken in and had a rather introverted personality. She told Andy that she had heard a strange sound, but he did not pay much attention and simply carried her back to her room. Just as Andy was about to return to his own room, he heard a noise coming from the kitchen. Rose stood there, unsure of what to do, looking at a boy named Truck. Andy reassured her not to worry, explaining that the boy had a habit of sleepwalking, especially when he felt anxious, and that it tended to get worse when there were strangers in the house. He then held Truck tightly and brought him back to his room. However, when they returned, they discovered that Caleb was gone, and the only unusual sign was that the window was open. Given that Caleb was blind, it made no sense for him to have climbed out the window, so the entire family immediately went out to search for him. The forest at night carried an eerie atmosphere. Suddenly, a worm fell onto Andy's shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a cocoon hanging from the tree, filled with crawling insects. At that moment, Caleb was standing on the edge of the dry well, counting down. Afraid of startling him, Andy slowly approached, noticing that the boy seemed terrified and dazed as he called out Andy's name. In the end, it was a close call.
8, 9.
Wait, Caleb.
When Andy carried Caleb back to his room, the boy's eyes turned white, and small children's handprints appeared on the walls. The scene then shifts back to Father Tomas, who was being watched by the police while at a pharmacy. It was said that an exorcist could not defeat a demon within his own mental realm, and might even lose his life, as the demon would know his hopes, his fears, and his darkest secrets. This had been Marcus's warning to Tomas, the inexperienced exorcist. However, Tomas firmly believed that bringing the demon into his own mental world was a more effective way to defeat it. He argued that, as less exorcists, they were vessels, and that refusing the demon at the door also meant refusing God. He cited Angela as an example, pointing out that even after she had merged with the demon, they had still managed to save her. Marcus, exasperated, remarked that if Tomas already believed he knew everything, then there was nothing left for him to learn, thinking that the young man seemed to have been rebellious by nature. At that moment, the demon awakened, and the two men rolled up their sleeves and began the exorcism on Cindy. Just at the most critical point, loud knocking sounded from outside. Marcus told Tomas to continue the ritual while he went to deal with the people outside, trying his best to persuade Cindy's husband.
I know what this looks like. The ones who don't say no. And right now, my friend.
Meanwhile, Tomas was reciting the Bible intensely when Cindy suddenly regained consciousness, and the image of that church kept appearing before his eyes. He then closed the Bible and decided to try his own method, choosing to face Cindy directly and attempt to guide the demon into his own mental world in order to perform the exorcism. Tomas was immediately drawn into that church, where handprints also covered the outer walls, and the holy water inside had turned black. Suddenly, a confessional booth appeared out of nowhere, and Tomas stepped inside, only to find Cindy sitting on the other side, as he tried to communicate with her. Marcus, who was facing the crowd alone, outside, was overpowered and beaten badly by the police. They then rushed in, dragged Father Tomas away, forcibly interrupted the exorcism, and took Cindy with them. This episode has ended. In this episode, Tomas, the inexperienced exorcist, had attempted a new exorcism technique, but failed due to forces beyond his control. At the same time, another storyline unfolds from the foster family on the small island, and these two storylines seem to be somehow connected. Is the blind boy Caleb possessed by a demon? Who is the demon inside Cindy's body? What did Tomas ultimately see in his inner world? Let's find out the answers in the next episode. This was a pure gold chalice with a purity level reaching 66. A man filled it with holy water, added a pinch of salt as if seasoning it, and then handed it to the cardinal. The cardinal cast a glance at Bennett and asked whether he wanted to verify the authenticity of the holy water. The tribunal bishop indicated that there was no doubt about this matter. The cardinal then drank it all in one go, yet nothing nothing happened, and Bennett's accusation collapsed on its own, as the cardinal showed no sign of being possessed. Back in Chicago, it had been the cardinal who pushed Bennett into the hands of the demon, nearly costing him his life, so Bennett had every reason to suspect that he was one of them. The cardinal immediately turned the tables on him, pointing out that the tribunal had not yet held Bennett accountable for failing to protect the Pope, yet he was already spreading baseless rumors. He then exchanged a meaningful glance with the tribunal bishop before giving Bennett a self-satisfied wink and walking away. At that moment, it became clear to Bennett that the church had been completely corrupted. The tribunal bishop, however, insisted that there were no demons at all, claiming that everything had been orchestrated by Marcus, who, after being stripped of his priesthood, was supposedly attempting to assassinate the Pope out of revenge. He then pressed Bennett, demanding to know where Marcus was. At that moment, Marcus and Tomas were tied up and being beaten by Cindy's husband. He demanded to know what they had done to his wife and why she had become so seriously ill. Marcus told him that she was indeed sick, but with something called Lucifer, and that the only people who could save her were now tied to a post by his own hands, meaning he was effectively killing his wife himself. Overcome with shame and anger, the husband lashed out and beat Marcus even more violently to stop him from continuing. Tomas began describing the church Cindy used to visit, mentioning that she had a pink radio there, which she used to play a certain song, and that she would sing along whenever she was happy, explaining that he had seen all of this in her inner world. Cindy's husband was taken aback, as those were things from more than 10 years ago, and he could not understand how Tomas could possibly know about that radio. Tomas went on to say that his wife was still in that church, waiting for him to come and save her, and that the one lying in the hospital was merely the demon occupying her body. As he spoke, he softly hummed the song. The husband began to waver, unsure whether the woman in the hospital was truly Cindy or not. She was convulsing in pain. Her pupils had turned into those of a possessed being, and her body was severely decaying, suggesting that she had already entered the stage of merging with the demon. Meanwhile, Marcus and Tomas fell into their usual argument. At that moment, the bearded old man standing outside received a phone call, and it seemed that something had gone wrong at the hospital. The group quickly rushed over, only to find the place in complete chaos. Cindy's husband stood there in a daze, and a long trail of blood stretched across the floor. From the doctor's office came a man's desperate screams. Inside, Cindy had wrapped herself around the doctor in a grotesque posture, explaining that what demons truly craved was not human flesh, but human fear, and as she spoke, she savored him. Tomas tried to awaken Cindy, but the doctor's fear only further stimulated the demon. She then slit the doctor's throat and climbed onto the ceiling before fleeing. Marcus and the others chased the demon all the way to the nursery, where it was holding a newborn baby and smiling in a dazed, unsettling way. It warned Marcus not to continue the exorcism, otherwise none of the children there would escape harm, and added that it wanted to play a game. While everyone was at a loss, Tomas began humming Cindy's favorite song. Marcus shouted for him to stop, afraid he would provoke the demon, but the demon reacted instantly, grabbing Marcus by the throat and immobilizing him. Realizing the situation was turning worse, Tomas kept singing, and gradually Cindy began to awaken, releasing Marcus and joining in the song with him. Taking advantage of the demon's momentary distraction, Tomas snatched the baby and quickly got it to safety. Marcus then lunged forward, pinned Cindy down, and the two of them resumed the exorcism. By this point, Cindy had already reached the stage of merging with the demon, and unless she could resist it with her own will, as Angela once did, forcing the exorcism would cost her life. As expected, the demon spoke again.
Let me in and I'll let her go.
And Tomas allowed it to enter his consciousness. He found himself back in that church, where Cindy was sitting in front of the prayer room, trembling and telling him that the demon was inside. Tomas finally came face to face with it. The demon tried to undermine him, suggesting that Marcus doubted his abilities. Undeterred, Tomas and Marcus worked in tandem, reciting the exorcism together. In the end, the demon within Tomas's mind turned to ashes.
By the coming of the Holy Spirit on the day of judgment. By the wondrous ascension, by the...
And in reality, Cindy also returned to normal. At the same time, Father Bennett also ran into trouble. Bishop Carl, who had been supporting him, informed him that another force had emerged within the church and was sabotaging the exorcism office. Many of the church's most skilled exorcists had been recalled, reassigned, or given duties unrelated to their roles. And for 6 months, the church had not approved a single exorcism case, suggesting that the demons had already declared war long ago. He then handed Bennett a photograph of a woman and instructed him to protect her. Sensing that he himself had become a target, Bishop Carl gave these instructions in advance. That night, he was taken away by the tribunal, and before leaving, he cast Bennett a subtle, meaningful look. Bennett immediately packed his belongings and escaped through a secret route, then called Marcus to warn him that the Vatican had completely rotted from within and urged them to run as soon as possible. Meanwhile, a goat was struggling to give birth, and even the nearby horse seemed restless, as if trying to help. With the careful assistance of the midwife, the goat finally delivered a strange-looking kid. As soon as it broke free, its ferocious face frightened everyone present, even startling the horse, which seemed to want no part in it. The farm owner then used a pitchfork to end the newborn's life. Shelby, who had originally been brought there to witness the miracle of life, instead found himself facing a disturbing and bloody scene. Andy and Rose spoke with Caleb, trying to find out why he had gone to the dry well the night before, but the boy was extremely resistant and insisted that he had only gone out for a walk to relax. After the conversation, Rose said she intended to report Caleb's condition to her superiors, while Andy urged her to think more carefully about what would be best for him, warning that if she filed the report, Caleb might be taken into the welfare system, where a blind child would have a very hard time surviving. Rose then brought up a more serious issue, pointing out that the entire house was filled with traces of Nikki and suggesting that Andy should let go of the past and start a new life. It became clear that the two of them had once shared a complicated relationship, and Rose seemed to understand what Andy had gone through, but Andy reacted strongly against the topic, and the conversation ended on an unpleasant note. Outside, Andy ran into Grace, who apologized for having overheard everything. Strangely, however, it seemed that Grace only interacted with Andy. Meanwhile, Caleb picked up an apple and took a bite, but after chewing for a moment, he spat it out, revealing that it was full of worms, suggesting that everyone in the house was being affected by some kind of evil force to varying degrees. Caleb later approached Andy alone to talk, explaining that it had been Verity, the rebellious older girl, who had led him to the dry well and then left him there when he climbed onto it. Andy went to confront Verity, but she denied any involvement. Unsure whether she was lying, Andy began to doubt himself instead, which deeply hurt Verity, prompting her to drive him away. Andy had put a great deal of effort into this family, so he went to Rose and asked her not to report the situation to her superiors, explaining that doing so might lead to the place being shut down and that he did not want to see the children left without a home. Rose agreed to his request, considering their past connection, and reported that everything there was normal, though it left an open question as to whether things were truly as they seemed. Night fell, and Shelby was walking home while reading the Bible. The place they lived in was extremely remote, and walking along such a road alone was enough to unsettle anyone. Suddenly, screams echoed around him, sometimes sounding like a baby goat, other times like a woman, and this time, it frightened Shelby to the core. Back at the house, Andy was waiting for Shelby to return when he heard movement downstairs. He went outside to check and discovered 2 bloody handprints on the front door.
Andy, it says in the Bible that lamb's blood can protect a home. There's something in the woods.
The scene then shifts to a pair of hands stained with demonic blood, now disguised as those of a Michelin-level chef. The woman crushed consecrated wafers and sprinkled them over almond pastries. At the same time, the cardinal was presiding over a ritual to summon a demon, holding a mixture made from the organs of a living person and inhaling deeply with a composed air that seemed to carry the weight of 82 years. The ashes in the air formed the shape of a demon, which then chose a person and entered through his mouth, completing a seamless union. The possessed individuals present stood up one after another and applauded. Their expressions are exactly like the 7th expression in your meme collection. The cardinal had prepared a surprise for the demons. He rang a small bell, and the Michelin-level chef began handing out almond pastries to everyone. The bishop took a big bite and then signaled for the others to eat as well. In the next moment, his large face twisted into something ferocious, and soon after, all of them began coughing up blood. It did not take long before they all died. The chef chef calmly picked up a candle and set the tablecloth on fire. It was a ruthless move, but when dealing with demons, there was little room for hesitation. The story then returned to the island. Andy was dealing with the strange goat kid that Shelby had brought back. He wrapped it up and placed it into a deep pit, but he kept feeling as if something was watching him. When he turned around, he noticed that a corner of the cloth had been lifted, as if something had touched it. Still, he did not think much of it and buried it anyway. Meanwhile, Caleb was applying eye drops when Andy approached him and asked why he had falsely accused Verity, since she had sworn she was not the one who brought him to the dry well. Caleb responded with an indifferent attitude, implying that if Andy chose to believe her, then he himself would simply be seen as a liar. Andy began to feel how difficult it was to be a parent. Not long after, Shelby came to him again and insisted that there was definitely something evil in the forest. Andy, trying to stay calm, told him to stop making things up because he was already overwhelmed. Shelby insisted that he had truly seen something. Andy, growing frustrated, warned that if Rose found out Shelby had smeared goat's blood on the door, they would all be in serious trouble. Shelby felt deeply wronged, as everything he had done was meant to protect everyone, yet Andy refused to believe him. After that, Andy went to find Rose, who told him she had decided not to report Caleb's situation. However, the rules required that a household like this be managed by 2 people, so Andy invited her to join his family. She agreed without hesitation, as if willingly stepping into it. The scene then shifts to the back of a little girl. She suddenly turned around, revealing a completely blank face. It turned out to be a dream of Father Tomas. Marcus asked whether it must have been a pleasant dream, hinting that it might be a side effect of letting a demon take hold so freely. Tomas reacted with clear disdain. Soon after, they received a new assignment from Father Bennett, and the 2 of them gathered their equipment and knocked on the door of a family. The woman of the house introduced her daughter, Harper, explaining that the girl had always been healthy, but everything had changed 6 months earlier. Harper had first become irritable, then began experiencing hallucinations, often seeing herself playing with imaginary friends. The woman told Marcus that the girl was upstairs. There, the child lay asleep, her face twisted in visible pain, making it clear that her dreams were anything but peaceful. Signs of decay had already begun to appear on her face, and on the surface, she did seem to be possessed. However, Marcus appeared to notice that something about the situation was not quite right. Marcus asked Harper's mother whether her daughter had shown any abilities beyond normal, such as suddenly speaking a foreign language or being able to predict certain events. The mother then took out a drawing that appeared to depict Tomas and Marcus holding crosses and confronting a frog-like demon, emphasizing that her daughter had drawn it 3 weeks earlier. At that moment, a heart-wrenching scream came from upstairs, and the mother said in terror that whatever was inside her daughter already knew they had arrived. Marcus noticed a book on the shelf, written by Angela's mother, and the woman explained that it was what had kept her going. The 3 of them then went upstairs. The mother first gave her daughter some water, and Marcus greeted Harper. Unexpectedly, the first thing Harper said was that she did not want an injection, which was strange, as most demons threatened exorcists. While this one seemed to fear being injected, Marcus told her he had come to help, but Harper glanced at her mother and replied that they could not help her. Marcus then asked for the name of the friend she mentioned, saying he wanted to meet him. Harper explained that he stayed under her tongue and would bite people when angry. Marcus checked her mouth but found nothing. At that moment, Harper began to feel unwell, and her mother suddenly shouted that it had come. Strangely, the 2 exorcists sensed nothing. While the mother reacted first, Harper writhed on the bed in extreme pain, and then spat a green liquid all over Tomas's head. Realizing the situation was not right, Marcus tried to ask for the demon's name, but there was no response, so he had Tomas try as well, with the same result. After struggling for a while, the girl finally calmed down. Tomas checked her blood pressure and heart rate, both of which were very high, and suggested that Marcus begin the exorcism. Marcus began to have doubts about Harper's case, while her mother confronted the 2 of them, questioning whether they were no longer willing to help. Marcus explained that they still could not confirm that the girl was possessed, and that performing an exorcism blindly would only harm her rather than help, so proper procedures had to be followed. The mother showed clear frustration at this response. At that moment, Harper started biting at the air repeatedly, and suddenly, the mother reacted as if something had bitten her, with blood beginning to flow from her abdomen. Just then, the doorbell rang downstairs, and the visitor turned out to be Rose. It was revealed that Harper was also a foster child, and that someone had reported her strange behavior at school, along with her absence for several weeks. The mother tried to keep Rose from entering by making various excuses, but Rose noticed the bloodstain on her clothes. As Rose was about to leave, she spotted escorted Father Tomas upstairs, immediately took out her phone to call the police, prompting Marcus to rush forward to stop her. At that point, Rose mentioned a crucial detail, explaining that Harper had been in and out of the hospital since birth. This remark made Marcus realize something was wrong, so he returned to the house and began searching, eventually finding a large box full of medication. He quickly went upstairs to stop Tomas from continuing the exorcism and confronted Harper's mother, revealing that she had deceived them. He explained that Harper's frequent hospital visits after birth and exposure to cleaning chemicals had caused her hallucinations, that her aggressive behavior was a side effect of medication, and that her vomiting had also been drug-induced. The supposed creature under her tongue, he added, was something the mother had fabricated, forcibly instilling the idea of possession into the child. Marcus then told Tomas that the injuries on the mother's body were actually self-inflicted scratches, and that she had not been reading the book for comfort but using it as a guide. Realizing she had been exposed, the mother fled downstairs, with Tomas quickly chasing after her. In the living room, they found a table covered with medicine. Suddenly, the mother appeared behind Tomas and struck him with a hammer, leaving him dazed, before grabbing it again and heading upstairs to confront Marcus. As the two struggled, Rose arrived with the police, and the girl was rescued, while Tomas was later taken to the hospital to have his head injury treated. At this point, Tomas admitted his mistake to Marcus, realizing that his experience in exorcism was still far less extensive than Marcus's, and Marcus finally regained a sense of superiority he had not felt in a long time. Just then, Rose came and told them that Harper could no longer return there, and that she had a temporary place that could take the girl in, which turned out to be that small island, meaning the two parallel storylines were finally about to intersect. Meanwhile, Shelby's ears were filled with a terrifying sound, and frightened, he grabbed a Bible to protect himself, sensing that something major was about to happen. So he followed the sound all the way to the lakeside, carrying a cross and beginning to pray. At the same time, Andy was talking with his neighbor Peter about life, and in a roundabout way, Andy asked whether Peter had encountered anything strange during all his years on the island, but Peter seemed to want to say something and hesitated, never finishing his thought, while at that very moment, something unusual happened on Shelby's side as he was praying. By then, Andy had already returned home and encouraged Grace to go outside and play, but she had her own reasoning scribbled across the window glass, which only made it more unsettling and raised the question of what she really was. Just then, a flock of crows flew toward them, and sensing something was wrong, Andy quickly picked Grace up and ran back inside as the crows began crashing wildly into the house. After the storm of crows passed, Peter came to see Andy and, picking up on Andy's earlier question about unexplained events, pointed out that those crows had come from the northeast lake, the very direction where Nikki had met her fate, then stopped speaking and apologized, leaving it clear that Nikki's death was very likely closely connected to that lake. After that, Andy ran toward the lake and saw Shelby praying there, so he asked what he was doing, and Shelby explained that this was where that force was strongest, and that Nikki had also died there. Andy insisted that Nikki had died because of depression and that it was his own negligence that had led to the tragedy. But Shelby countered that if Andy was wrong, then whatever had killed Nikki might also have caused the changes in Caleb, which made Andy angrily cut him off, saying he respected Shelby's faith and could tolerate many things, but he would not allow anyone to question his wife. The story then shifted to Father Bennett, who met Bishop Carl and was assigned to protect a woman, the same 5-star chef who had previously wiped out the cardinal's entire demonic organization. The two were suspicious of each other, and she remarked that she had observed him for 3 days without ever seeing him pray or even receive communion. So to prove they were both genuine, they each took communion in turn, establishing contact formally, after which she stated that Bishop Carl might already have been killed, though the cardinal's group Bennett had reported earlier had already been eliminated by her, and when Bennett tried to ask her name, she replied that she did not have one and could only take him to meet the name she carried. So the two of them went down to a basement, where she asked Bennett if he had ever heard of someone named Dolores. He replied that of course he had, as she was an exceptionally skilled exorcist, though she had disappeared months ago, and everyone had assumed she was dead. The woman then told him that demons did not kill exorcists, they did things far worse, and urged him to look at what was left of Dolores now. In the middle of the hall, a woman was chained, her eyes having turned into dual wool pupils, while a containment circle formed with the ashes churches of saints surrounded her, creating a boundary that demons could not cross. With sacred objects placed all around and a chant playing in the room to suppress the demon. Every arrangement there designed to weaken its power. When Bennett tried to have the chant turned off, the demon immediately attempted to attack him, and once the dual pupils faded, it began to speak in a human voice. This nun, Dolores, had once been one of the church's finest exorcists, yet the church now mocked her as someone overtaken by a demon, and on her hand was a scar identical to Bennett's, suggesting she too had once suffered at a demon's hands. Bennett picked up a crucifix, intending to perform an exorcism on her, but the woman snatched it away and told him it was useless because the nun no longer existed. When Bennett asked why she kept her alive, she explained that the demon inside her knew secrets from the highest ranks, and all the demons she had eliminated so far had been located through its information. Still holding on to hope, Bennett suggested that perhaps the nun's consciousness was still trapped inside, recalling that 6 months earlier, 2 of his friends in Chicago had successfully separated a demon from Angela's body. At that moment, the demon turned to look at him, and the woman pointed out that demons could communicate with one another, meaning those 2 friends had already kicked a hornet's nest, and now all exorcists were in extreme danger. Demons would either recruit them or erase them, and for 2,000 years, exorcists had been the last line of defense against demons. Yet before anyone had even realized it, the war had already begun, and worse still, they were about to lose. That night, Bennett tried to awaken what remained of Dolores's consciousness, but the demon spat in his face and implied that the time for deceiving humans was over, telling him not to waste his strength. Feeling helpless, Bennett gave the demon a little water, and it went on to warn him that someone would come for him, and then for the old man and his young disciple as well. Wanting to know who this someone was, Bennett pressed for an answer, but the demon only hinted that he had already encountered that figure in Chicago, leaving Bennett completely confused. Seizing the moment when Bennett let his guard down, the demon suddenly attacked, though the holy light inflicted heavy damage on it, forcing it to drag Bennett into the circle. Just as it was about to kill him, the woman injected the demon with holy water, saving Bennett in time. Afterward, the 2 discussed the assassination group targeting the Pope in Chicago, recalling how she had been captured by demons back then, and how Marcus had stopped the attack. She seemed quite familiar with Marcus, and kept pressing Bennett about his whereabouts, but Bennett admitted he had lost contact with them. The woman then suggested that if they could capture another demon like this one, they might be able to find out who was truly behind everything, which suddenly reminded Bennett of Maria, who had been possessed, leading him to decide to start with her. Meanwhile, Father Tomas called his sister, who complained that he had not even sent her birthday wishes, and added that someone from the church had come looking for him. Tomas decisively hung up and snapped the SIM card, then told Marcus that they could not stay there any longer, as they had lost contact with Bennett and had no clear idea where to go next. So Marcus suggested that they should first make sure Harper was safe before deciding anything else. On the island, the Foster family was having a meeting, and Andy introduced that a new friend would soon be joining them. Everyone showed concern for Harper and kept asking about her condition, but Grace alone said she did not want the girl to come, prompting Andy to remind everyone to put themselves in others' shoes and be understanding, though the expressions on their faces seemed strangely off. And Grace still refused to accept Harper, only to be cut off by Andy, leaving her upset as she ran outside, forcing Andy to follow her. There was something unsettling about the place, as it seemed that no one except Andy could hear Grace's objections. After Andy left, Truck tried to go after them but was stopped by Verity, who explained that Andy had been under too much pressure lately and just needed some time. Outside, Andy found Grace standing by the door and approached to comfort her, but she stared blankly past him and, in a malicious tone, insisted that Harper should not be there. Just as Andy turned around, the door suddenly slammed shut, and Grace immediately threw herself into his arms, saying she was scared, while Andy reassured her that it was only the wind. The next day, Andy and Shelby watched a man named Peter dealing with the dead crows. All of them had died with their necks snapped and without any sign of pain, which made Shelby uneasy as he took it as a bad omen, while Peter calmly explained that it was simply science. Global warming had driven temperatures too high and disrupted the birds' navigation systems, causing them to lose their way. Shelby then brought up the deformed baby goat at the Jessup neighbor's house, but Peter responded that deformities were quite common and even promised to take samples for further investigation. After seeing Peter off, Shelby went downstairs to play with the other children, while Andy went upstairs to have tea with Grace. He asked if she wanted to move the tea party downstairs so the others could join, but Grace complained that he cared more about the other children and no longer loved her, prompting Andy to gently explain that he loved them all equally and hoped she would help welcome Harper. When she arrived, instead, Grace looked away and stubbornly insisted she did not want to go. And at that moment, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room. On the other side, Marcus and his companions took a boat to the island. As soon as Tomas stepped off the boat, he felt that something about the island was not right. Rose first introduced Harper to her new home and assured her that this new place was especially wonderful. After that, the four of them drove to Andy's house, where everyone was already waiting downstairs, while Grace sat on the staircase wearing a mask. When Marcus got out of the car and saw cobwebs on the trees, he immediately sensed that something was off. Nearby, Truck was describing the appearance of the two priests to Caleb, and they seemed to react with clear discomfort toward the identity of the two clergymen. Just as everyone was about to enter the house, Grace removed her mask on the stairs, and a sudden gust of wind swept through the house. She then turned and ran upstairs, and something abnormal began to occur inside. Tomas stared at a trembling painting, his mind racing wildly, and his expression matched the third meme in the viewer's collection. He wondered what kind of demon this was, and how even a real estate property could be shaking. Grace quietly appeared behind him. Tomas sensed her gaze, but when he turned around, there was nothing there, so he slowly walked forward and stared blankly at the ad. At that moment, Shelby interrupted his thoughts, introducing himself to Tomas as a believer and asking why they had come there. Tomas replied that it was to ensure Harper's safety, but Shelby pressed further, asking if that was the only reason. Tomas hesitated, wondering if there could be any other reason, but before Shelby could continue, Rose cut in, forcing him to awkwardly leave. Tomas then became certain that something was wrong with this place. Meanwhile, Andy was showing Marcus his Pastor vegetable garden when Marcus noticed dead crows on the ground and asked what had happened there. Andy explained that a flock of crows had suddenly crashed into his house for no reason, and he had no idea why. Marcus looked up again and saw cobwebs in the trees, further reinforcing his suspicion that something was wrong. Tomas later found Marcus and told him that a child wanted to say something to him and that he felt the place was not right. After hearing this, Marcus decided to walk around and investigate the area. After that, Marcus met Peter, the same man they had encountered earlier. Peter was a researcher from the Animal Protection Society, and he had found a deep-sea fish washed up dead on the beach. He told Marcus that it was not only fish and birds showing abnormal behavior, but livestock were also being born with congenital deformities, and many farms were experiencing the same problem. He further suggested that these issues might be caused by exposure to some kind of radiation source, implying that a toxic substance was likely leaking from it. Marcus wanted to know more about the island, but Peter said they could talk next time, handed him his phone number, and even invited Marcus to go to the sea with him later. The relationship between the two seemed rather unusual. Tomas was preparing to leave the island while trying to reassure Harper that she would be happy there. At that moment, Andy came downstairs and invited Tomas to join a small ritual with the children. The two of them went upstairs, where Harper dipped her hands in paint and pressed a handprint onto the wall. Andy and the other children clapped to celebrate, then told Harper that they were now a family and that no matter what happened, this place would always be her home. Tomas stared in shock at the wall covered in handprints, as it looked exactly like what he had once seen during an exorcism of Cindy. Meanwhile, the relationship between Andy and Rose quickly grew closer. Since Nikki's death, Andy had felt deeply lonely, and Rose's presence had eased much of his emotional burden. While they were talking, Grace, with a blank expression, secretly watched them, and it seemed she was about to cause trouble. That night, a dark figure entered Rose's room. Rose woke up and first thought that Andy had come to see her, but the shadow slowly crawled toward her instead. In panic, she tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't work. She fumbled for her phone in fear. Just as the shadow was about to reach her, she turned on the flashlight, and the shadow disappeared. Rose got out of bed to check, but stepped into a pool of black liquid. At that moment, Harper suddenly screamed. It turned out that Harper was having a nightmare, in which she saw her mother. Rose held the girl in her arms and comforted her. Meanwhile, Tomas and Marcus were drinking at the pier. Tomas said that what he had seen must be some form of revelation. Marcus asked helplessly who was doing the revealing. Tomas replied that those things had always been in his mind, and that it was probably God guiding them here. Marcus said he had not heard God's voice for a long time, and felt that his abilities were gradually fading. Perhaps God had arranged for Tomas to appear not as his partner, but to replace him. However, based on the the recent series of events, there was definitely something wrong with the island. They now had work to do. Tomas asked whether Marcus was starting to trust him. Marcus said that he trusted him, and he trusted God, and that was all he knew. The scene shifts to Andy. Grace said that she wanted him to be happy, so they went out to the backyard to play, and they had a very good time together. At that moment, Verity returned home. When she entered, she did not see Andy, but she heard laughter coming from the garden. When she walked over, she saw Andy there. Verity's expression immediately turned very worried and full of suspicion. After finishing playing with Grace, Andy brought her back to her room. Verity followed him downstairs. After Grace went to sleep, Andy went downstairs and walked outside. Verity quietly went into Grace's room. At that moment, the door to the room felt completely different from before. When she opened it, Grace was not there. The warm smile from earlier was gone, and instead it was an old, abandoned painting room. The room was filled with all kinds of strange paintings. On the floor, there were 2 moldy sandwiches covered in maggots.
Somebody in here?
Andy, looking cheerful, called Grace to come out and play. Grace signaled for him to be quiet and pointed to the side. Only then did Andy notice that Verity was also there. Verity asked in shock who he was talking to, and which Grace he meant. When Andy turned around, Grace was gone. He stepped on one of the moldy sandwiches and snapped out of the hallucination. The room had turned into a bizarre, fossil-like space. Verity asked him if he was hallucinating because he missed Nikki. Andy suddenly became angry without reason, asking whether he was not even allowed to miss Nikki. He said that this place was his private space and drove Verity out. Andy fell into confusion. What was wrong with him? Suddenly, something bit his shoulder for no reason. In an instant, the room transformed again into Grace's room. Grace was standing there with her arms outstretched, asking for a hug. Andy knew none of it was real, but when he turned around, Grace, who had just been sitting on the bed, was now standing on the stairs.
Not real.
Andy began packing his things. He told Rose that he would take everyone out camping that night. Rose said that Harper had just arrived, so going camping immediately might not be very appropriate. While Andy was explaining this to Rose, Grace suddenly appeared beside him. At that moment, Tomas returned again. He asked Rose whether she had noticed anything unusual in the house and indicated that he wanted to talk to the children. Right then, Tomas sensed that there seemed to be something unclean. Upstairs, Rose strongly opposed the idea. She felt that it would harm the children, especially since she had just managed to stabilize Harper's emotions, so she politely asked Tomas to leave. The scene shifts to Marcus. He arrived at Peter's boat, as arranged. Peter told him the island's past. 60 years ago, a happy family on the island experienced a strange murder case. The man of the house, for reasons unknown, killed his wife and children. At that time, his eldest daughter was attending a party on the island. The man chased after her and carried out a massacre at the party using an iron chain. Fortunately, the police arrived in time and shot him down, and the eldest daughter narrowly survived. The eldest daughter was still alive. If Marcus wanted to know more details, he could go and find her. So the two of them went to meet the woman. She said that her father was not an alcoholic and did not abuse them, and that he had once been a very family-loving man. At that time, she felt that what killed her family was not her father. Instead, whatever it was emitted a voice that was both dark and piercing, speaking in a language she had never heard before. Marcus was shocked, realizing that these traits were exactly those of a demon. Marcus immediately called Tomas. He said that the demon, which had existed for decades, would not be easy to deal with, and told Tomas to wait for him so they could act together. Tomas agreed verbally to Marcus's suggestion, but he still went alone toward Andy's house.
Daddy, are you mad at me?
Andy's heart skipped a beat, and he said that he was not angry. Grace asked why he would not look at her. Andy replied that he was afraid she might be a hallucination.
Because I'm scared you're not real?
You're a silly Billy.
When Grace tried to step closer to him, Andy stopped her. At this point, Andy still did not know that the girl was a demon. He believed he was simply suffering from hallucinations. Grace began to lose control, insisting that if he believed she was not real, she would make him feel her true existence. Suddenly, Andy felt a sharp pain in his chest. He lifted his shirt to look, and to his shock, even though he was not afraid of insects, he still felt his whole body break out in goosebumps. His chest looked like a beehive, and a bee was crawling out from inside it. To be honest, Andy was surprisingly brave. He still acted as if nothing had happened and urged everyone to leave quickly. After everyone went outside, Andy saw Grace sitting angrily on the stairs. The little girl looked so cute even when she was upset. Andy told her not to follow him. The campfire party made the children very excited and they all got along quite well. Andy stood alone, feeling tense. At that moment, Grace appeared again, hugged Andy, and said that she was all alone at home and very scared, and that she wanted him to go back with her. Andy begged her to let him be, saying he had been under too much pressure lately and that Grace was nothing more than a hallucination. He told her to stay away from him, but Grace coldly said something threatening.
I want you to come home.
Just then, Rose ran over and told Andy that the children were having a great time playing. When Andy turned around, Grace had disappeared again. Andy told Rose that he felt something was wrong, and that ever since Nikki's death, he had not been able to cope well. Rose hugged him to comfort him. At that moment, Andy saw Grace appear again. Behind them, Grace looked very angry, and said that if he cared so much about his family, she would start with them first. Then she walked toward the children. Right then, truck suddenly froze in place. Father Tomas arrived at Andy's house. Suddenly something abnormal happened inside. Tomas turned on his flashlight and searched the house carefully, examining the handprints on the wall. At that moment, the attic door opened by itself. Tomas slowly walked over and discovered a large patch of black mold on the ceiling. There was definitely something unclean upstairs. Then, the record player suddenly started spinning on its own. Grace was standing beside it, looking at him with a cruel expression. The scene shifted to the campsite. Verity told Shelby why she hated priests so much. She revealed that she had once been abused by her adoptive parents. She had been forced to undergo exorcisms, which led her to attempt suicide 3 times. She advised Shelby not to believe in God anymore. At that moment, everyone realized that Truck was missing. Verity volunteered to go and look for him. She carried a lantern and went to the abandoned wooden house. There, she found Truck banging his head against the wall. Grace was holding a doll and hitting it against the wall as well. It seemed that Truck was being controlled by her. Tomas was being toyed with by Grace. Grace deliberately led him toward the attic. Even though he still could not see her, he could hear the sound of the doll hitting the wall. Grace turned the doll around, grabbed its neck, and forcefully smashed it against the wall. Truck grabbed Verity and slammed her into the wall. Suddenly, the entire house began to shake violently. Tomas quickly picked up the Bible and began reciting exorcism prayers loudly. Grace looked at him cruelly, and the prayers had no effect on her at all. Suddenly, all the objects in the room began to float in the air. Grace seemed to have grown bored and threw the doll away. Immediately, everything in the room became quiet again. Andy arrived at the wooden house and rescued Verity. Truck also woke up. Everyone assumed that everything had been caused by Truck's sleepwalking. Rose then took Truck away alone. While Andy took Verity for a medical checkup, Tomas was 100% certain that there was a demon here. Among the scattered objects, he found a strange stone. When he picked it up, he felt a powerful evil force coming from it. Just as Tomas, in the name of God, ordered the demon to manifest itself, Grace suddenly appeared. It seemed as if she was saying that since he wanted to see so badly, she would let him see everything to his heart's content. She then grabbed Tomas's hand and pulled him into a hallucination. Tomas was deeply shocked. First, he saw a family that had died tragically. Suddenly, a man with a hunting rifle shot him. Then the man shot himself. After that, a mother personally pushed her son into a dry well. Tomas could vividly feel the victim's pain. Finally, he saw a man attacking several little girls with an iron chain. While Father Tomas was fighting the demon alone, Marcus was elsewhere, paired up with Peter again, which was utterly inappropriate. After experiencing the deaths firsthand, Tomas fainted in pain. At the same time, Andy brought Verity back. Verity asked why he had brought her home, instead of taking her to the hospital as he had said. Andy already understood what was going on. He rushed straight upstairs. Everything was witnessed by Tomas outside the door. Andy entered Grace's room and began violently smashing objects inside. He demanded to know what was in this house and warned it to stay away from his children. At that moment, Andy also noticed the stone. He picked it up and smashed a painting on the shelf with it. Behind the painting, a figure wearing a clown mask appeared. Clearly, it was not Grace. The figure slowly walked toward Andy. Out of curiosity, Andy removed the mask, only to discover that it was his deceased wife, Nikki. In an instant, Andy lost all resistance. Downstairs, Tomas looked up in shock. A light from the room shone out, illuminating the dark night. On the other side, Father Bennett was carrying out the final rite for Dolores. He asked the demon whether the nun Dolores was still there. Mouse urged him beside beside her, saying that people from the church were about to find them, and they needed to leave quickly. As she spoke, she used a large syringe to draw a vial of holy water. The demon seemed frightened and kept begging, saying that it was Dolores herself and pleading with Bennett not to abandon her. Bennett had completely lost all hope. He believed that Dolores would never place her own life above others, so he personally injected the holy water into the demon's heart, giving Dolores what he considered her final dignity. Was all of this real? Andy still remained doubtful about Nikki. Nikki, transformed by the demon, gently caressed Andy. The sensation felt too real. Andy gradually let his guard down. The demon then began to seduce him. The reason demons are terrifying is not because of how they kill, but because they can precisely identify what a person desires most and fears most in their heart. Andy felt as if he was going mad, but Nikki's tenderness completely made him drop his resistance. Just as they were about to embrace, the children downstairs called out for Andy. Nikki told him that their time together would be long, and that the children needed him more right now. Andy begged Nikki not to leave him again. Not this time.
I will never leave you again.
Marcus met Tomas at the agreed time. Tomas was very anxious and urged Marcus to go with him to Andy's house immediately, saying that the demon there was extremely powerful. Marcus was slightly annoyed and asked why Tomas had not waited for him, as they had planned to act together. Marcus had just experienced a night of pleasure, so he could not possibly know what Tomas had gone through the night before. At that moment, Tomas's hallucination appeared again. The car was filled with the bodies of children. All of these children had appeared in his hallucination. Marcus quickly helped calm his emotions. Tomas told him that he had seen the bodies of many children, all of whom had been killed by the people they loved. When he picked up the stone in the attic, he had felt all of this, even experiencing the pain of their suffering. For the first time, he felt how close death was to him. No one knew how long the demon had been on this island, hundreds or even thousands of years. The demon treated the island as its hunting ground. The scene shifted to the troubled children's center. Truck was temporarily placed under supervision because he had harmed others. He told Rose that there had been a person in his mind at the time, forcing him to do it. Andy was acting very strangely that day and kept spacing out. Rose told him that Truck could be taken home temporarily, but Andy refused, fearing that the boy might affect the other children. Later, Andy sat alone on a bench. He asked Nikki whether it was her who was in Truck's mind forcing him to do those things. Nikki comforted Andy, saying of course it was not her doing. The children already had issues of their own. At the same time, after Rose finished the paperwork, she noticed Andy's strange behavior. The two of them returned home just as Marcus and Tomas arrived. Rose shared her suspicions. Father Tomas had once asked her whether any family members had shown strange behavior. Besides Truck, Andy had suddenly become very unusual as well. Tomas subtly told her that it was something that took advantage of people's emotional weakness to invade them. Rose did not understand who that thing referred to. Marcus replied that it was a demon and asked if further explanation was needed. He said this demon specialized in invading the minds of parents and then controlling them to kill the children they loved most. Although Rose still did not fully believe it, she agreed to their request to speak with Andy. Marcus quickly realized that there was something wrong with Andy. When Andy returned to the kitchen, Nikki appeared behind him. Andy became very angry and questioned why Rose had brought them back to the house. Nikki told him that it was obvious they were trying to split them up, and that what Andy needed to do now was simply endure. After dinner, the four of them talked, and Rose asked a few questions about exorcism. Tomas answered everything seriously, but Andy remained highly resistant. The entire time, Marcus, experienced in exorcism, deliberately used provoking words to agitate Andy. Just as Andy was about to lose control and argue with Marcus, the demon appeared and stopped him. After that, Andy went into the kitchen to get a kettle of water. Marcus told Rose that he was using a provocation method, explaining that once Andy lost emotional control, the demon inside him could be forced to manifest. Andy brought out the kettle and poured water for everyone. But when he poured water for Tomas, Tomas suddenly experienced another hallucination, seeing blood flowing out of the kettle instead. It was clear that Tomas had already been affected by the demon before, and now that the demon had appeared again, its influence became even stronger. Marcus then fought Andy alone. With the demon's help, Andy remained unusually calm, and no matter how Marcus provoked him, Andy was able to respond. This continued until Marcus took out the stone from the attic, which finally enraged Andy, and he wanted to drive Marcus and his companions out. At that moment, Rose also turned against them and asked them to leave. The demon appeared behind Rose and told Andy that he had already warned him that Rose was not trustworthy. Before leaving, Marcus told Andy to resist him for the sake of his children. Andy warned them that if they did not leave, he would call the police, so Marcus and Tomas had no choice but to withdraw temporarily. The two of them decided to wait until nightfall to return to the house, take Andy away from the children, and then carry out the exorcism. The storyline shifts to Father Bennett. He and Mouse had arrived in Chicago and successfully found Maria, the woman who had merged with the demon at the end of season 1. By this time, Maria was seriously ill and near death. The demon mocked them, saying that Bennett had once been its intended companion, but in the end it turned out to be useless. Maria instead, it said that it was still not too late for Bennett to change his mind, and that the exorcists had already lost this battle. Mouse did not want to engage in a war of words with the demon, so she replaced its IV drip with holy water. The demon was in extreme pain from the holy water. In the room, Mouse also discovered photos of Marcus and Tomas. The demon continued trying to persuade Bennett to accept it, saying, for example, that Tomas was doing very well, that he did not accept Marcus's opinions, and that he had great potential. Here, the demon was referring to Tomas's potential ability to let the demon enter his consciousness. At that moment, the demon suddenly turned to Mouse and spoke to her using Marcus's voice. Bennett stood there in confusion. The demon said it seemed that Marcus had been hiding some things from her, including how he had become an exorcist. These words clearly struck Mouse's pain point, and she shouted at the demon to stop talking. The demon then revealed another shocking piece of information, asking what had really happened at the convent 20 years ago. Suddenly, Mouse fired a shot and killed Maria. The moment the demon left, it released a massive burst of energy, shattering all the surrounding glass, and the chandelier nearly fell onto Mouse. Fortunately, Bennett managed to push her down in time. Bennett then questioned Mouse about what had happened 20 years ago, since she had known Marcus for a long time. Suddenly, Bennett felt a sharp pain as he had been stabbed by the broken glass earlier. At that moment, the two pupils in Maria's eyes also disappeared. Rose apologized to Andy, saying that she should not have brought Tomas and Marcus over. As they were talking, the two of them ended up kissing. Just as they were about to move on, Andy was horrified to see a pair of hands emerging from Rose's neck. The demon appeared again. It lay beside Rose, laughing sinisterly as it looked at Andy. At the same time, Harper's foster mother arrived. Harper tried to struggle.
No, it's okay. Put your shoes on. It's quiet.
Stop it. I'm not going with you.
But her foster mother pulled out a knife and threatened her. Just as she was forcing Harper toward the door, Marcus and Tomas arrived.
Hands off. Let her go. Lorraine, please. You were right, love.
Don't you talk to
Upstairs, Andy looked at Nikki, who had been transformed by the demon, with deep guilt in his heart. The demon's eyes turned completely white. Andy, under its influence, accepted its kiss. At that moment, Andy was fully taken over by the demon. Rose, standing nearby, was scared enough to wet her pants. Just as she was about to run, the demon knocked her unconscious with a single glance. The powerful energy sent everyone on the staircase flying into the air as both sides confronted each other. Marcus and Tomas took the chance to rescue Harper. However, it has to be said that their combat ability was really quite weak. They could not even control a single woman. It was unclear where all their usual strength went. Upstairs, Andy, now under possession, tried to strangle Rose. At that moment, the cries for help from the children outside the door awakened the last remaining trace of his consciousness. Tomas was still struggling with the woman downstairs, and she kicked him hard, making him cry out in pain. Just as he was about to pick up the knife again, Andy suddenly appeared in front of him. Andy grabbed the woman by the neck with one hand and lifted her up with terrifying strength. He then stabbed and killed Harper's foster mother. After that, Andy collapsed weakly onto his knees. He began breathing in a strange, unnatural posture, and a voice that was not his own came out of his mouth. His eyes turned completely black, the color of someone possessed by a demon. This time, the Marcus-Tomas duo had work to do again.
From the snares of the devil, deliver us, O Lord! Behold the cross of the Lord!
The woman slowly walked into the lake. The dark water quickly swallowed her up. Andy rushed forward in desperation, but it was already too late. Just moments earlier, he had received a note from Truck. It was a message Nikki had written for him. "Don't forget, I will always love you." Andy suddenly felt that something was wrong. Nikki was not in the house, and there was no sign of her in the yard either. He searched all the way to the lakeshore, where he saw Nikki slowly walking into the lake. Andy froze on the spot. By the time he reacted, it was already too late. The rescue team was immediately called and began a full search effort. Peter comforted Andy beside him, telling him that life is like this. No one knows which will come first, tomorrow or the unexpected. Andy said that this was not an accident, that everything was caused by him. He had been too focused on the children and ignored Nikki's recent changes. At that moment, the rescue team recovered Nikki's body. Seeing her like that, Andy completely broke down. People pulled him aside, and the police took the body away. The only thing left for Andy was that stone. The children stood at a distance, watching silently. At that moment, exorcism chants echoed in Andy's ears, pulling him back to reality. Marcus and Tomas were performing an exorcism on him. As Andy endured intense pain, fragments of his happier memories kept flashing through his mind. Gradually, he began to regain consciousness. The first thing he asked was how the children were. Tomas told him that the children were all safe. Andy said that he had been unable to stop Nikki. Marcus encouraged him not to be cowardly and to fight the demon to the end. He told Andy that the Nikki he saw was not his wife at all, but a demon that had discovered his weakness and struck him precisely. The demon's goal was to make the entire family die together. Andy said that he could not resist it at all. Tomas told him to stay calm. The demon would distort his perception and make him forget certain memories. He urged Andy to try to recall when it had first approached him. Andy recalled the days after Nikki's passing. Verity, who had always been understanding, tried her best to pull him out of his depression. Verity was the first child the couple had adopted. Compared to the other children, her bond with Nikki had been especially deep. Verity suddenly asked Andy why Nikki had taken her own life. Andy explained that she had suffered from depression and that if she did not seek help from others, no one could help her. Verity then asked what if she had always been seeking help, but no one had ever paid attention. In his dazed state, Marcus's voice echoed in Andy's ears, encouraging him to try to remember when the demon had first come to him. Andy's memory drifted back to Nikki's painting room, where he had been staying, quietly mourning her and crying alone. Suddenly, a small hand rested on his shoulder. A little girl asked why he was sad. Andy said he had just lost a friend. Grace said she could be his friend instead. The moment their hands joined, the painting room instantly turned into a warm, small room. This was exactly what made the demon so terrifying. It had precisely identified what Andy desired most deep in his heart. Grace was holding a clown hood in her hands, saying she did not have the courage to go outside and play. This stirred Andy's maternal, protective emotions even more. At that moment, Andy heard Marcus's voice. Hearing it, Grace panicked and ran out of the room. Andy chased after her, but in an instant she disappeared. The clown hood fell on the stairs. At that moment, Nikki appeared behind him again, continuing to seduce and manipulate Andy.
Are we?
Andy, stay with us.
Andy, fight back. For your children.
Andy writhed in pain. Just as he turned around, Nikki was suddenly lying right beside him again. Rose was worried that the body of Harper's foster mother would start decomposing and that the children were not going to school, so it would not be long before social services discovered everything. Marcus said that they could not call anyone for help at this point. Not only would Andy die, but everyone else would also die. Rose decided that she would take the children away from this dangerous island first. At that moment, Andy's consciousness had already been taken over by Nikki. In this illusion, they were living a carefree life in a villa, driving cars, only missing a dog to complete the picture. Andy asked where the children were. Nikki said they were probably in the backyard. In reality, Andy was screaming in pain. Even a beautiful dream came at a price. Marcus and Tomas kept reminding him that everything he was seeing was an illusion and that he should resist the demon and fight it to the end. Nikki led Andy to the villa. Andy liked the interior decoration there, but he quickly realized something was wrong. There was no room for the children. He kept asking where the children were. Nikki impatiently said they were in the garden. Andy went to the garden but saw no sign of the children. Instead, he found 5 freshly dug graves. In a state of madness, he began digging, trying to pull his children out. Nikki tried to stop him, saying that she had died because of them. She claimed that when she needed him most, the children had taken him away from her. It was all their fault. Only then did Andy begin to realize that this was not his wife. Nikki would never blame the children for her depression, but this Nikki kept insisting it was the children's fault, which angered Andy.
I can see pretty clearly right now.
Suddenly, Nikki grabbed Andy's head and dragged him into a memory. The two of them were in the middle of trying to conceive a child. Truck and Caleb suddenly burst in. Nikki chased them out and pressed her face against the door, crying in despair. Andy pushed Nikki away, saying that things were not like that. Nikki continued to torment him, showing him more scenes of the children being rebellious and defiant, which led to her breakdown. At that moment, Marcus and Tomas's voices echoed in Andy's ears, reminding him that the demon would distort and conceal his memories. Andy insisted again that this was not how things had actually happened. In his memory, Nikki was gentle and lovely, even more attentive and careful with Verity. Just then, the demon disguised as Nikki suddenly appeared again. Andy woke up from the dream. The scene felt too familiar. The same morning, the same cup of coffee, and Truck handing him that note just like before. Only then did Andy finally react. This was the morning Nikki had taken her own life. He immediately ran out of the door, but everyone tried to stop him from going to save Nikki. He pushed the children aside and ran to the lakeshore. This time, Nikki actually turned back when she heard his voice, but she gave Andy a strange smile. Then, without looking back, sank into the water. Andy jumped in and managed to save her. At that moment, the children appeared by the lake, all saying that they wished Nikki would die.
Pretty. She doesn't look pretty to me. I'm glad she's dead.
Nikki's eyes turned completely white, and she began vomiting black water. In reality, Andy also vomited black water. Marcus immediately turned Andy over, otherwise he would have suffocated. After vomiting, Andy desperately begged Marcus and the others for help. Marcus told him that the demon was distorting his perception, and that from now on, he had to focus and follow his voice. Suddenly, Andy's perception began to warp. He could no longer distinguish what had really happened from the demon's illusions. In extreme pain, he twisted and writhed. Marcus and Tomas began performing an exorcism on him. Mold-like stains began to spread across the room, and it seemed the demon had truly arrived. The room instantly fell silent. To Andy, Marcus and Tomas now looked strange. They had both turned into distorted, ferocious demon-like figures. The two of them tried their best to torment Andy further. Andy's memories became even more distorted. The holy water in the cross caused him unbearable pain. Even more terrifyingly, Tomas suddenly launched a counterattack, as if the demon was using him to lure Andy into begging for help. Unable to endure the torture any longer, Andy finally surrendered to the demon. "I spare you." Time stopped. Nikki, transformed by the demon, appeared again, throwing herself onto Andy and taking the burning pain of the holy water for him. The demon then forced him to make a final choice. Andy's consciousness returned to the morning when Nikki had taken her own life. This time, all the children in the house were tied up. Andy did not even glance at them. He walked past Caleb and ran straight to the lakeshore. This time, he managed to save Nikki. The two of them kissed. In reality, Andy erupted, fully accepting the demon. His consciousness sank into the demon's gentle illusion. He and the demon-disguised Nikki lay together in a void-like space. In the background, the exorcism chants from Marcus and Tomas could still be heard faintly. Andy asked Nikki if she could hear anything. Nikki replied that she could not hear anything. Andy then asked when they could leave this place. Nikki answered that they could leave when the time was right. In reality, Marcus and Tomas were reciting the Bible, while the demon was provoking and trying to disrupt their relationship. The demon seemed to know Marcus very well. It asked Marcus how his companion Tomas was, and compared him with the little mouse in the church, asking which one was better. Tomas asked Marcus who the little mouse was. Marcus replied that it did not matter, and continued the exorcism ritual. Marcus kept calling out to Andy, telling him not to stop resisting. Andy, however, responded that he was sorry. He was no longer there. It seemed the demon had separated Andy's soul from his body. The storyline shifts to Father Bennett, who has just regained consciousness after a period of unconsciousness. Mouse told him that he had been unconscious for a distance of several hundred kilometers, and that, moreover, his wound had become infected, so she should take him to the hospital. Father Bennett firmly insisted that he was fine, that they needed to quickly find Marcus and his companions, and he also asked Mouse to tell him about her and Marcus, but as soon as he finished speaking, he fainted again. Mouse, feeling anxious, fell into a flashback, recalling that at that time she was still a nun, and Marcus was also very young and handsome. She had once gone on to cut Marcus's hair, and their relationship had been extremely ambiguous, with both of them hoping the other could escape their current life. However, Marcus had expressed that his fate was determined by God and could not be changed, while Mouse said she wanted to meet that guest, and Marcus replied that he would not allow his little mouse in his church to encounter anything at all. The scene shifted to another moment, where Mouse went alone to the demon that had been imprisoned by the church. In order to prove herself to Marcus, she began practicing exorcism. Throughout the process, the demon kept provoking her and told her that Marcus, at the age of 12, had already seen the true appearance of God, and that compared to him, she was nothing. Provoked by these words, Mouse accidentally stepped into the demon's barrier and was immediately overpowered and restrained by its violent force. She later regained consciousness and found Marcus beside her. She said that everything was her fault and asked him to let the demon take her away, but Marcus refused to give her up and instead described a hopeful future for her. Suddenly, the demon took control of Mouse's consciousness and mocked Marcus madly, unable to bring himself to exorcise her. Marcus shed painful tears. When Mouse woke again, the person beside her was no longer Marcus, but two other priests, who told her that Marcus had been unable to exorcise her and had left 3 weeks earlier, and they reminded her not to act impulsively again. Returning from her memory, Mouse brought Father Bennett to the hospital, where the doctor informed her that his condition was very serious and that he had to remain hospitalized for treatment. Mouse was left with no choice but to leave Father Bennett at the hospital and set off alone to find Marcus. Father Tomas heard a strange, discordant sound. It seemed that the corpse of Harper's foster mother was twitching, but when he turned around, nothing had actually happened. Tomas grew suspicious and wondered if he had recently been resting too little and was hallucinating. He gave Andy some water, but then heard the same discordant sound again. Tomas closed his eyes and tried to steady his emotions, telling himself that everything was just an illusion. Sure enough, Andy, lying near the woman, noticed him, let out a sigh of relief, and bent down to pick up a piece of glass. At that moment, Andy secretly hid one of the glass shards. On the other side, Marcus sought Rose's help, hoping that a child could be sent to see Andy. Believing that this might help awaken Andy's consciousness, Rose refused, afraid that Andy might harm the children. Verity, who had overheard their conversation, insisted that she still wanted to help Andy get through the danger no matter what. Before going upstairs, Marcus reminded Verity that Andy was currently being controlled by a demon, and that what he was saying was not his true will. He told her she needed to find a way to awaken his soul so that he could fight against the demon himself. The demon would expose her weakest points and attack her there, so she needed to be mentally prepared. Verity calmly replied that she would let it come at her if it wanted to. Andy heard Verity's voice and woke up. Verity mentioned the original intention when Andy and Nikki had adopted her. Andy mocked Verity for being too naive, saying that for a troubled child like her, they would not have adopted her without a generous reward, and that she would always be nothing but trash. Rose became worried that the situation might get out of control and wanted to end the conversation. Verity, however, firmly said she could handle it. The demon then shifted into Nikki's voice, mocking Verity as nothing more than a filthy, insignificant rat. Father Tomas, standing nearby, reminded Verity not to believe anything the demon said. Verity knelt by Andy's bed, while Andy secretly pulled out a piece of glass in his hand. Verity spoke of her gratitude for Nikki's love and tolerance, for accepting her lack of kindness toward them, and for loving her deeply, no matter what she had done. She said she did not want to leave Andy. The glass shard in Andy's hand tightened as he trembled uncontrollably. Verity urged Andy to resist and return to everyone, then gently kissed his forehead. At that moment, Andy suddenly regained consciousness. He told Verity that he loved her very much, then shouted at the demon in anger.
Leave! Go! Run! Get her out of here!
Marcus and Father Tomas continued the exorcism on Andy. The demon's schemes became increasingly sophisticated. It first used Peter's voice to mock Marcus's sexual orientation, then used Mouse's voice to ridicule Marcus for abandoning his lover. It even told Marcus that it had heard mouse meat was delicious. Marcus could not contain his anger and moved to strike Andy. But Tomas stopped him and told Marcus to rest while he kept watch over the demon. While Tomas was reading the Bible, the demon pretended to be resting, but secretly used a piece of of glass in its other hand to cut through the restraints binding it. A short while later, Marcus entered and told Thomas that he was feeling much better. He thanked Thomas for everything he had done and said that Thomas had truly grown into a real exorcist. Thomas was very pleased. The two of them continued the exorcism on Andy. However, it was all just an illusion. The real Marcus was still resting downstairs, while Thomas had his eyes rolled back and kept repeating the same phrase over and over again. The figure on the bed had long since disappeared. Meanwhile, the children were waiting at the dock for the ferry to leave the island. At that moment, the port suddenly lost power. Verity went to her neighbor Jessup's house to look for a book she had dropped. The house was pitch dark. She managed to find her book by feeling around in the darkness. But when she was about to leave, she saw the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Jessup. At that moment, Rose appeared at the door and told Verity to run immediately. But Andy suddenly showed up behind Rose and knocked both of them to the ground. In the mirror, the demon revealed its true form. Rose immediately fled the house and hid behind a pile of wood holding a pitchfork. Taking advantage of Andy's distraction, she struck him down with a blow. However, at that moment, Andy began begging for his life. The opportunity to end things early had already been wasted because of Rose. Father Thomas was drawn into an illusion by the demon. Marcus dragged him into a storage room, trying to wake him up. In the dream, Thomas heard Marcus calling him and gradually began to sense that something was wrong. In particular, Marcus's exorcism ritual felt like a joke. Confused, Thomas walked out of Andy's room, and when he opened the door, he found himself inside a church. He had become a bishop. A colleague approached him and greeted him. Thomas asked him why he was there. The colleague praised him as the youngest bishop in 20 years and said that he was the one who had built this church. Everyone outside the door were Thomas's devout followers. Thomas followed someone into the main hall of the church, where he saw a familiar face sitting below. Marcus realized he could not wake Thomas in a short time, so he had to hide him and went off alone to find the fleeing demon. The scene shifts. Two men in suits found Marcus's pickup truck. Seeing that the engine was still running, they drew their guns, preparing to kill Marcus. However, they were both killed by someone hiding under the vehicle. That person was Mouse. Her combat ability was truly exceptional. Counting these two, she had already killed nearly 10 antagonists. These two men in suits had actually been sent by the Vatican to assassinate Marcus. Marcus arrived at the Jessup neighbor's house and found that the couple had already been killed. Seeing blood all over the floor and signs of a struggle, Marcus followed the trail and moved forward along it. At this point, Andy had already arrived at the harbor. He picked up the children who were preparing to go home. Shelby was extremely suspicious, wondering what Andy had become. The children all felt that something was wrong with him, but no one dared to speak up. Soon, they arrived at the wooden cabin in the forest. Shelby asked Andy why they had come here, but Andy did not pay attention to him. Caleb asked Andy what it felt like to be possessed by a demon. Andy replied that it was extremely painful and that he was completely powerless, only able to watch helplessly as the thing harmed his family. Shelby, still doubtful, asked Andy whether the demon had truly left. Andy smiled and nodded. He told the children to get out of the car. Shelby reminded everyone to lock the doors, but embarrassingly, the car keys were already in Andy's hand. Shelby asked Caleb for a stick and tried to fight Andy head-on, but as expected, he was badly beaten. The three children were brought into the cabin, where Verity and Rose were also present. Andy asked them what the most important thing for a family was, saying that it was to stay neatly together. Verity had a special ability. No matter the situation, she could always find a way to cleverly escape. Rose reminded her to stay calm and observe her surroundings carefully. Verity steadied herself and began thinking of a way out. At that moment, Andy brought Shelby back. Having already broken his leg, Andy asked everyone whether they were waiting for Truck, saying that as a family, they should die neatly together. By this point, the demon had answered all of their doubts. Andy asked Verity how it felt to be strangled by Truck, then showed her the truth of the night when he himself had been grabbed by Truck. After that, Andy turned to torment Shelby. Shelby shouted angrily that he had known it was Andy all along, that it had always been him. It was revealed that the scream Shelby had heard in the forest that time had actually been produced by Grace, disguising herself as the demon. Andy praised Shelby for being smart, but said that the result result would still be death. Anyway, the demon seemed to recall something and said angrily that the number of lives it had taken was still too few compared to God's, and that it wanted to change its approach. From now on, it would kill them one by one. Then Andy began to call out names. Whoever his finger pointed at would be killed. His finger stopped on Caleb. At that moment, Caleb was utterly dumbfounded, wondering if he was going to be shot without even saying a word. The demon explained that it had been the one who led Caleb to the well in the first place, and that it had nothing to do with Verity. Just as the demon was about to kill Caleb, Rose began to draw its hatred. Andy coldly said that she was nothing, not even truly part of this family, just a dependent. Rose mocked him, saying that she had even stabbed him with a pitchfork the night before. Andy was provoked and hung Rose over the mouth of the well, telling her to count down her remaining time. Rose tried to awaken Andy's consciousness, but it was completely useless. Andy used his will to break each wooden plank covering the well. After finishing his cruel farewell words to Rose, she was thrown into the well. Andy went back into the house to choose his next target. He had never liked Shelby, so he grabbed him by the throat. At that moment, Verity managed to free herself from her restraints and ran outside. The children worked together to hold Andy back. Caleb kicked Andy hard, and for the first time they managed to push him back. Andy then chased after them. Just then, Marcus arrived at the cabin and helped the children untie themselves. Harper rushed to the well and discovered that Rose was still alive. In the end, the children worked together and pulled her up.
Caleb, we got her!
To avoid Andy, Verity hid deep inside a cocoon-like nest. Even though insects crawled all over her body, she did not dare move. However, she was eventually found by Andy. At the critical moment when Verity was about to be killed, Marcus rushed in and fought Andy. However, he was clearly no match for the demon and was quickly overpowered and strangled. The scene shifts to Thomas's dream. He was praying for the believers when he, the stall, noticed a familiar face below the platform. It was Casey, the girl he had saved in season 1. After the prayer ended, Casey approached Thomas and said she needed his help, adding that her mother was somewhat old-fashioned. Thomas almost spat out in disbelief, thinking, how could her mother be old-fashioned? Casey continued, saying she could no longer control her body and often had terrifying and insane dreams. Thomas thought to himself that all the suffering he endured in the previous season had been for nothing, and realized that she was not Casey at all. Seeing that he had been exposed, the demon began attacking Thomas mentally, telling him that as a priest he had abandoned many people just to make himself different. Thomas insisted that everything here was an illusion. Casey said she could baptize him and help him return to his previous life. Thomas replied that he would take responsibility for all his actions. The demon asked him why, wherever he went, people died, and how long it would take before he destroyed everything around him. It then tried to tempt him, saying that the priest's power came from the Bible, but it possessed even greater power. It asked if he did not want to become the Pope of Mexico, promising to make it happen if he only said the word. Thomas answered that long ago he might have wanted that, but now the only thing he wanted was to kill it. He then shouted that he wanted to wake up. The demon was struck back repeatedly and forced to retreat. After that, Thomas woke up in a room, but as soon as he opened the door, he saw the demon. Thomas thought to himself that even within his own consciousness, he could not allow it to take control. With a roar-like exorcism chant, he forced the demon to reveal its true form. The demon then rushed forward and bit Thomas. Marcus, in the forest, was also being tightly strangled by Andy. At that moment, Thomas was seemingly protected by Jesus. At the same time, in reality, Andy, who was strangling Marcus, was also affected. Marcus took the opportunity to gain control over him, seeing that the demon had been knocked down and transformed into Andy. Andy weakly told Thomas that he would not be able to hold on much longer, and asked Thomas to promise that he would definitely kill the demon no matter what, and never allow him to harm another family. At that moment, an exorcism chant echoed in Thomas's ears. Thomas shouted for Andy not to give up. Then Thomas returned to reality, where Mouse was standing right in front of him.
I'm Mouse.
In Father Bennett's hospital room, 2 uninvited guests arrived. They were talking about the exorcism office, saying that it had always been a thorn in the side of demons, and that Bennett was the most influential person in the organization. They hoped that when Bennett returned to them, he would be able to fulfill their request. At that moment, a beautiful nurse walked in and told them that their friend was about to wake up, adding that he had just been talking in his sleep. The 2 men became extremely excited. Under Bennett's bed, the summoning device for the demon had been placed. released, and the ashes inside were already floating in the air. The demon was preparing to invade Bennett's body at any moment. The scene shifts. Marcus struggled to drag Andy, who had been knocked unconscious. Looking up, he saw Thomas running toward them. But then Mouse appeared, leaving Marcus completely stunned and speechless. At that moment, Andy woke up again, revealing a smug smile. The three of them took Andy to the cabin. Marcus asked Thomas why he had brought her along. Mouse explained that Father Bennett had wanted to come find Marcus, but he had been injured by Maria in Chicago. She then relayed Bennett's message, saying that the church had completely rotted away, that exorcists were either being killed or turned into demons, and that they might had already lost the war. Marcus criticized Mouse for coming to such a dangerous place. Mouse, however, was still troubled by the fact that Marcus had abandoned her back then. The two of them ended up arguing. Thomas, standing nearby, finally could not take it anymore and said that they could at least acknowledge his presence, especially since there was still a demon to deal with. Andy looked at the three of them and calmly said that it seemed like a perfect day for an exorcism. Above the small island, thunder and lightning continued to flash across the sky. Meanwhile, Rose and the four surviving children were boarding a boat to leave the island. They looked anxiously back at the island. Verity suddenly asked Shelby if there was any prayer she could say, saying she wanted to do something for Andy. She also wondered if her lack of full faith in God might affect the effectiveness of the prayer. Shelby told her that it would not matter. The two of them then began to pray. The three great exorcists joined forces to perform an exorcism on Andy. During the ritual, the demons struggled violently, and the entire cabin was nearly crushed by its overwhelming power. After a difficult segment of the exorcism was completed, Andy lost consciousness. The three of them stepped forward to check on him, but the demon's intrusive laughter could still be heard coming from Andy's mouth. Ha ha ha! A helicopter was circling the island, searching for fugitives. A strong beam of light shone directly into the cabin. Thomas sighed and said that they did not have much time left. Marcus decided to continue the exorcism, while Mouse believed they should simply shoot Andy, arguing that killing the host would also kill the demon. She added that if Andy were taken away by the police, the demon would win. As she spoke, she drew her gun. The demon looked completely stunned, wondering why she was not following the rules, and said that in all its years as a demon, it had never seen someone so reckless. Marcus told Mouse that they were exorcists, not executioners. The demon then suddenly brought up Friar Simon, whom Marcus had killed in Chicago. Marcus replied that at that moment, he had no other choice. The demon insisted that he always had a choice. It said that Marcus pretended Friar Simon was the first person he had killed, but in his heart, he could never erase the image of himself killing his own father, and that he felt no remorse at all. Marcus stepped forward and looked straight into the demon's eyes, saying that it was the first one to ever speak the truth. At this point, Mouse realized the problem. The children had already left the island. The demon had failed to achieve its goal, and it also knew that in the end, it could not defeat the three exorcists. But then, why was it not leaving? Thomas said that Andy was holding the demon back so that they could kill it. Andy did not want the demon to go out again and harm other families. Mouse said that in that case, they should follow his wish while they still had the chance. However, Marcus still refused to kill Andy. Thomas then suggested that there was another way. He could replace Andy as the new host of the demon. A priest's body as a vessel was the demon's greatest reward, but allowing oneself to be possessed was clearly suicide. Thomas had seen Andy within the demon's consciousness. He was still resisting. Even if there was only a sliver of hope left, he wanted to save Andy. Marcus said that the price was something no one could bear, as the demon would destroy his will and consume his soul. Thomas remained firm, saying that his life belonged to God alone, and only God had the right to decide whether he lived or died. The demon could no longer wait. It urged Thomas to stick to his decision. Thomas replied that if the demon wanted him so badly, then it should come and take him. After that, Thomas entered Andy's consciousness. The entire space was pitch black, and shadows kept darting through the darkness from all directions. The demon, surprisingly considerate, had even left a flashlight on the table for him. Thomas took it and searched for Andy's traces. When he reached a room, a pair of glowing eyes slowly emerged from the darkness. Andy pulled Thomas into the bedroom and said that he was still struggling against the demon. However, each time he killed it, it became slightly stronger. Thomas said that they would take him out, but Andy shook his head, saying he could not leave. He could not allow the demon to go out and harm others again. Moreover, he had already hurt many people. How could he face them? They could not let the demon go. They had to kill it. Andy also told Thomas that if anything happened to him, he hoped Thomas would pass on a message to the children.
I want you to take back a message for the kids. Say what?
He asked whether Thomas had ever dreamed such a dream, one where it felt like he would never wake up. Andy was trapped in such a dream. He sighed, saying that if this were only a dream, how wonderful that would be. However, they did not expect the demon to be so cunning. It even launched a surprise attack. Taking advantage of Andy's distraction, the demon dragged him away and then began to threaten Thomas. Demons appeared all around him. Thomas ran into the painting room upstairs and used a cabinet to block the door. Unexpectedly, Andy was also there. In despair, Andy told Thomas that the demon was too powerful and he could no longer hold it back. Thomas told Andy that he no longer needed to resist because it was now his turn. Thomas said he would offer himself to the demon in exchange for Andy's release. The demon kept banging on the door while Thomas began reciting the exorcism chant. At that moment, the painting on the wall began to melt. The pool of black liquid was the same one that had appeared in the first episode. Then a dead human head slowly emerged from it. Marcus and Mouse immediately realized that something was wrong. The demon was beginning to fully possess its host. At the same time, the demon's control over Andy began to weaken. Marcus, helpless, raised his gun. In the spiritual world, a weakened Andy desperately tried to tell Marcus to shoot and kill him, but Marcus could not hear Andy's voice. At that moment, the demon's voice came out of Thomas's mouth, and even his eyes developed a second pupil. Andy, gathering his last bit of strength, managed to reclaim control for a brief moment and looked firmly at Marcus, signaling him to act quickly. Marcus pulled the trigger and shot Andy dead. The demon vanished along with him. The next morning, Andy's body was found by the police. An investigator came to question Rose. Rose only said that the foster mother of Harper had come to the island to take the child back, and Andy had accidentally killed her, after which Andy went mad. She did not mention Thomas or Marcus at all. After the interrogation ended, Rose went outside with the children. The children were worried about whether they would be separated and sent to different families. Verity said that whether they were separated or not no longer mattered, because they would always be a family. Thomas conveyed Andy's final message to them, saying that each child had been a part of his life, that he deeply loved every one of them, and that he hoped each of them would have a good life. Thomas then said goodbye to the children and returned to the motel. Marcus, feeling depressed, told him that he was planning to quit being an exorcist because he had killed someone who still had consciousness. His hands were no longer clean, and he did not deserve to continue. However, he said he did not regret pulling the trigger, but he could not pretend that nothing had happened. Moreover, he had not heard God's voice for a long time. Thomas expressed that without Marcus, he truly did not know how to continue. Marcus told him that he was an exorcist and that he should believe in God, not anyone else. Before leaving, Marcus asked Mouse to take care of Thomas. Watching Marcus's back as he walked away, Thomas felt a deep sense of reluctance and said in disappointment that without Marcus, he could not do this job. Mouse then told Thomas that perhaps God had led Marcus to begin this journey with him, and maybe it was now her turn to lead him to its end. And so, the two of them began a new journey. The scene shifts to the hospital. Father Bennett's eyes had developed a second pupil, suggesting that he had merged with the demon. Holding a giant surgical knife, he killed the nurse who had been taking care of him. 3 months later, Rose took over the unfinished responsibility left by Andy and brought all the children back under her care. She was determined to look after them properly. Marcus walked alone along a pier, staring into the distance. Suddenly, Marcus took off his hat, his eyes welling with tears, and said, "Damn it, The Exorcist Season 2 ends with a late sense of hope." Many viewers say that the exorcists are actually useless and far inferior to Mouse. The duty of an exorcist is to save those possessed by demons, but the process is very long, sometimes taking weeks, sometimes months. However, the current situation does not allow that, so they can only choose to kill the host in order to eliminate the demon. At the end of this season, 2 major loose ends were left. First, Father Bennett, who had already merged with the demon and is expected to become a major opponent. Second, Marcus, who stood on the pier as if he had heard the call of God. At present, we still do not know what the true purpose of these demons is, nor who the real final boss behind everything is. There is still no news about Season 3, and no one knows how vast and interesting this demon universe will become. In the end, there is only hope left.